I don't want to say only on this continent, but around the world, I think the issue is the same, that the elections can become a contested terrain. And so we'd like to know from our IEC how ready we are. We come at that question, obviously, with fresh memory of the state capture report presented to our society last year, all of which pointed to the very real danger of state capture, state corruption, state interference in public institutions of all sorts. And we'd like to be reassured, obviously, that the IEC has not been part of that capture, or in any sense being tainted to misrepresent the will of the people in important ways. And so it's our delight today to be able to welcome the IEC. They have served this country well in the past. We are looking forward to the same being the case with these upcoming elections. All of us are quite aware they are very, very decisive in terms of how we understand our past and how we understand our future. And so, without wasting much time, we'd like to welcome Ndate Masego to come up. And by the way, as I welcome to those of us who are in the audience today, just to acknowledge also those who are outside of this room who are listening in on Facebook, in the streaming platforms that DOD will be communicating the process of this morning beyond the boundaries of this room. So we acknowledge you all. We thank you for taking the time to being with us. We'd like to welcome Ndate Masego to come along and to share. Oh, you're going to go first. Okay, sorry about that. No. Welcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Reverend. Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Nomsa Masugu. I'm one of the 5 commissioners of the Electoral Commission. I stand here, I bring you greetings from the Electoral Commission and especially from the Commission. I bring you the apologies from the chairperson of the Electoral Commission, Mr. Msuto Miepe. He and Commissioner Mashinini are attending the funeral of the late Prince Buthelezi. So I am here. We are 1 commissioner short. The process to get the replacement for that commissioner, you might have heard, is before it has just gone through the Portfolio Committee of Home Affairs and will soon be in the National Assembly for voting. I think the message that I want to leave with you is to say, congratulate you for this initiative, and to say to you, I think people forget that they own the Electoral Commission. It's a public institution. So Election House, which is the headquarters of the Electoral Commission, is yours. You pay our salaries, and please feel free to take our numbers. And any time that you need information, please feel free to approach us directly. I normally hand out my cards so that if you have any difficulty reaching anybody, I can help facilitate your whatever it is that you need. We've got a lot of data if you need data. And I just think if you get comfortable with the fact that the Election House is yours, then you will visit us more often. When there's something that you don't understand, you won't hold back. You must come. Accountability means you are asking us questions, and you must ask those questions and have them answered until you are satisfied. That's the message that I have come to deliver. And I thought it was important enough for me to actually come here to deliver that message. And on that note, I'd like to introduce Masego Shiburi. He is the Deputy CEO responsible for electoral operations. So when we look at the state of readiness, we always look at it from the prism of electoral operations. So Masego is going to come here and try and take you through all of that. And then we will talk. So we look forward to a great presentation. And whatever you need, whatever time you need it, WhatsApp makes sure that you can drop me a message and I will answer you within 30 minutes. It doesn't matter where I am in the world. And that is what I believe being a public servant means. So have a great morning and we will keep talking. Thank you. Masego.
Good morning. I hope that over time we will answer the question, are we captured? Not in words, but in action, because words can have a lot of meaning. Thank you and good morning. The presentation this morning, I still have 30 minutes. Okay. We'll deal with a few things just to illustrate the state of our readiness. The first one is the planning framework. The second one deals with our level of readiness. The third one deals with the system underpinning all the work that we do. Fourth, I would spend a few minutes dealing with what I think occupies your mind, the integrity of the results. Do the result reflect the will of the people as expressed freely on the ballot paper? And lastly, we'll share key statistics that I don't think we need to go into. Upfront, let's say this, and it's a repetition that is worth mentioning. The term of legislative assemblies subsists for 5 years. The president and the premiers are responsible for announcing the date of an election. All that they do is to pick a date within a window period. But an election may never be held beyond 90 days of the end of term. So these legislatures were inaugurated in May 2019. Their term will end on the 22nd of May next year. And within 90 days of that day, an election must be held. So an election will be held sometime between May next year, but no later than around the 14th of August. You'll know that there are already 2 constitutional court challenges challenging aspects of the Electoral Amendment Act. On our part, we are preparing on the basis of the law as it stands, not because we are conceited, but because we are informed by key constitutional principles. The first is that an election must take place within 90 days of the end of term, and 2, an electoral system that does not include independence is constitutionally impermissible. We will have 2 general voter registration weekends where we open the network of 23,300 voting stations. The voting station still represents the only prism through which South African citizens can formulate an opinion about the performance of the IEC. It also represents an equalizer of opportunity because every one of us with a little bit of effort can access a voting station very close to where we live. For these elections, South Africans overseas will participate. We've made it a bit easier for them to participate because we've removed the requirement for them to inform the Chief Electoral Officer of their intention to vote. So if a South African citizen is registered in London and they intend to vote in London, they don't have to do anything other than to take their passport and ID document on voting day determined for overseas territories on the day of the election to vote. Previously, they would have needed to give us notice of their intention to vote and indicate where they intend to vote. The guests of the president's prisoners will also vote in this election. We'll have a period for their registration, and on voting day, we'll send teams into all those prisons to enable those to vote. And lastly, these elections, for the first time,
will include independents, adult citizens who are not affiliated to political parties, to stand for elections for seats in the National Assembly as well as seats in the provincial legislatures. The next two slides talk to our level of preparation. We are a very small organization, and at election period, we expand by employing people on short-term contracts. So we've expanded our capacity by the 1st of May. Second point there talks to a launch of a capture platform. What that means is that we know that the Act as amended requires unrepresented parties, parties that are registered but do not have seats in a legislature or the National Assembly, an independent candidate, to demonstrate support of at least 15% of votes that would have won them a seat in the previous election. So we've created a portal to assist unrepresented parties and independents to capture the details of their supporters. We are meant to go live in August, but we've placed a hold on it because one of the challenges in the Constitutional Court implicates the quantum of signatures that a party or independent candidate need to submit to demonstrate support. We've updated our dealing base, finalized our network of voting station situation, location of voting stations, and we will finalize the contracting because we don't own voting stations. At the end of October, we'll finalize the contracting of those voting stations and confirm their availability for the 2 registration weekend, including the election period. Successfully, those will be promoted to key staff that manage on voting day. And their training has started in readiness for registration weekend. The key thing here, every time an election is called, is that the IEC employs SAT2 members, SAT2, which is a trade union, COSATU, which is in alliance with the ANC. And therefore, the elections cannot be free and fair because you have comrades managing elections. Our response to that is as follows. One, we have a recruitment criteria that is approved by the Commission. Criteria against which we employ people. The criteria demands the following. A person must not have a high political profile. Must have not been found guilty of a serious criminal offense in the last 5 years. And once we've recruited staff, candidates at the local party liaison committee to say, here is the list of staff per voting station, per ward. Suitability. If they're not suitable, the Commission will replace them. But we cannot sustain a generalized, these are teachers and therefore members of SATU, and therefore they cannot be entrusted with managing elections. So for a 2-week period in September, we have given to parties and candidates the list of those people that we're going to confirm at voting station for them to raise objection, which objection must have a nexus with the recruitment criteria. I've highlighted a point there in red to demonstrate that for all the system enhancements that we've done, we will have a dedicated day in October where is an election period to stress test our systems and to check if our system do that which they were designed to do. The date is somewhere in the month of October. Last few weeks, the Commission had circulated draft regulations for comment. One of those draft regulations speak to the quantum of amounts that parties and candidates must deposit if they wish to stand for election. We will have the first vote 18th and 19th of November. Very soon thereafter, we will have registrations abroad in South African missions and embassies. Again, here, there's a point to be made. There was a push before the 2019 election to expand the footprints of voting stations overseas to locations over and above embassies and missions. Parliament considered the matter and it unequal treatment of voters, because in friendly territories, it may be possible that the government there allows you to open, you only restrict you to an embassy. And if you have an equal spread of opportunity for people to vote, it means voters in friendly territory will have more access to the votes than voters in unfriendly territory. So for next year's, voters are limited to vote in embassies and South African missions abroad. The law has been amended in 2021 to give the Commission authority to determine the number of seats for each legislature. The number of seats for legislatures were last determined in March 1999. So then the province of KZN was awarded 80 seats, which is the constitutionally maximum number of seats. And over time, we know that population densities have changed, population patterns have changed. So the Parliament amended the law to give the Commission authority to review ahead of each election that each legislature has. We've started consultation with legislatures and treasuries. And the Constitution requires the following, that the number of seats must be determined based on scientific data related to population in that province. So we will use the Stats SA data as the scientific basis to determine the number of seats in each of the provinces. We already know that we can't do anything with the province number of seats permitted in the Constitution. We know we cannot reduce from the province of, because the Constitution guarantees that even where the population doesn't support that, a base allocation for a legislature is 30 seats. So a province like Gauteng will likely 80, and all other provinces where there's demonstrable growth in population will also have an adjustment. The only province which is outside this framework will be the province of the Western Cape, because it has its own provincial constitution and it determines the number of seats in that legislature in terms of that provincial constitution. We are aligned with them. They will also publish their number of seats as determined by them in the time that allows us to plan for election. The last point here is the determination of regional seats for the National Assembly. We all know that the National Assembly has 400 seats, constitutionally determined in terms of Section 46. 200 of those seats are spread across the 9 provinces, or as they call it, the regions. And 200 are elected directly on a national-to-national ballot. So how the 9 province is on the basis of the registered population. So it is in the interest of a population of a province to increase its registration population so that it benefits from the spread of the 200 seats that the commission will determine. In all probability, the seats will be finalized. The determination will be made after the second registration weekend. This slide just demonstrates that we have, we recall ahead of 2021, the Commission invested in a voter management device intended to do 2 things. One, in the aftermath of Mhlophe and Kham judgments in the Constitutional Court, that a voter's roll must contain addresses of voters where addresses exist objectively. Two, following the elections in 2019, there were unproven allegations that there were people who were able to vote more times than they were entitled because they could remove the indelible ink with household detergents. So the Commission, ahead of 2021, invested in a voter management device, which assists us to do two things. One, to register people and to confirm their address at the point that we register them, so that a person is always registered against the political boundary in which they ordinarily reside. The second thing is to help us to manage the voters' roll on voting day, to obviate accusations that people are able to vote more times than they are able to. How does it do it? You come to a voting station where your name is on the voters' roll. We mark you off the voters' roll on the device, and it replicates across the database so that if you present yourself at another voting station later, your name will appear as having participated in that election. So the device we got and used for the first time in 2021. We've just upgraded the operating system on that device, and we've also introduced an offline mode because we are aware that not every corner of the Republic has reliable network connectivity. And in instances where there's prolonged power outage, it interferes with the GSM antennas and the system is not accessible. So the device will work both in online mode and offline mode. In mostly urban areas, the device will work 100% in online mode. So if you come to apply for registration, before you leave the voting station, you'll receive an SMS which confirms the outcome. Either you are rejected and a reason for rejection, or that you are registered and reason for your rejection. We've also looked at when we first procured the device, because we did not know which device we'll get, our apps were designed in an agnostic fashion so that they can operate on an Android and also on another operating system. We know the device that we have now operates on Android, so we have defaulted all our apps to work and maximize them to work on Android operation. Other systems enhancements, we have rewritten the candidate nomination system to enable the nomination of independent candidates. As I said earlier on, we've developed a portal to facilitate the capture of details of supporters for unrepresented parties and the independents. We've rewritten the ballot paper generation system to facilitate inclusion of independent candidates. We have redeveloped the results system to record votes for independents and to allocate seats to them. Ahead of each election, the Commission commissions an independent audit of the results system. So we get an independent firm to run audits on the system to check whether the system does that which was designed to do. That even on election day, 1 + 1 is still 2 for all the parties and not for some of the parties. Once we've done this and we have a report, we also allow parties and independent candidates who are so minded to appoint their own specialist, IT specialist, to go into the system, play around in the system, and satisfy themselves that the system does that which it was designed to do. Even with this election, we will persist with those arrangements. Other arrangements, and I won't go into detail on this one, but just to give you a flavor. Because we are alive to the threat of cyber security, we run a parallel security system for the results system. We move our website and host it offsite. We disaggregate our servers so that if we are compromised on one, we can still continue. We have a disaster recovery site which replicates data almost every day on an hourly basis, so that even if we are compromised, we have a chance to reconstruct the IT environment. Is it foolproof? Nothing can be foolproof, but it has stood us in good stead up to now. We know that with each election, there are attempts at getting access into our ICT environment, and so far we've been able to repel those things. It doesn't mean we have relaxed. We are looking at additional technology to help us mitigate the risk of cyber attacks. We launched an online voter registration system about 2 years back, where a person from the comfort of their home office or wherever can go onto our website, create a profile, and be able to register themselves as a voter or update their details. It appeals mostly to younger people. What we are currently struggling with is to have it as a free service. And the challenge is that most of the network providers that we spoke to, they said they could do a reverse billing, or they could give us a facility of no charge if we are able to ring-fence all the activity into a single URL. But because if you register, you must go out, tunnel out, and call on other services, like, for example, Google Maps to confirm your area where you are registered. We have not been able to move on the reverse billing or on the service being data free. Time, a capability for South Africans who find themselves overseas but are not registered to register remotely and online. The result system, I've spoken about this. We've redeveloped the system to record votes for independents and to allocate seats to independents, and that people can audit the result system. The area of interest for you will be, and it's moving on my slide, it's not moving on the screen. I just speak to it. Okay. Ballot paper design elements. We currently have over 350 political parties registered just at the national level. If you add the municipal registration, the register of parties has in excess of 600 political parties. With each election, the number of parties increases, but it does not translate in an increase in plurality of voice in the legislative assemblies. In 1994, there were 17 parties, I think, or 19 parties that contested elections. With each election, there's been an increase. In the last election, 48 political parties contested the seats in the National Assembly, while the representation has plateaued since 1994 at about 13, 14 political parties. So the increase in contestation has no corresponding increase in representation in the Legislative Assembly. Our interest is not to limit the plurality of voice in the assemblies, but is still to secure the import of a ballot paper for the voter. Because a ballot paper is an instrument that the voter uses to identify a party they wish to vote for and to make a mark for that party with certainty. And they trust that us as the Electoral Commission will then record that choice as having made and translate it into representation in legislative assemblies. We've just finalized the design elements of the ballot paper. And among friends, I can share this. Research that we've done with voters have indicated to us a preference of a longer ballot paper where parties are set one after the other on the ballot. We've always tried to honor that. But with this election, we cannot guarantee that we'll be able to honor that, because we know there is a limit to what the printing capacity in the country can achieve on a long ballot. So the Commission has approved a design of the ballot paper on a double column. So if parties exceed 48 parties, we have no choice but to go for a double column ballot paper. And with that comes the increased risk of miscast votes as well as spoiled ballots, because some people may make 2 marks instead of a single mark on the ballot paper. We print ballot papers locally in the country. We also appoint some capacity to check for quality assurance of the printing operation. And only security accredited printers can print ballot papers. And when we design the ballot papers in-house in the IEC, we also have a minimum, every time a minimum of 7 security features on that ballot paper. Some are obvious to the eye, a lot of them are not discernible with the naked eye, so they are embedded in the ballot paper. For example, the obvious ones that you'll know is when you try to photocopy it, it will just write void on the face of the reproduced ballots. Some are not as easily discernible. We also have a counterfoil with its security number, which has serial numbers, so that we know the number of ballot papers that we've printed, and by serial number, I can tell you which ballot went to which station. But the face of the ballot that the voter marks will not have a serial number in order to protect the secrecy of that vote. This slide summarizes if it comes up. This slide summarizes the result capturing process. The brownish color represents those activities that are manually driven, and the other color are things that we have been able to automate. At the end of it, at the close of a voting station, we convert that voting station into a counting station. So we do not transport uncounted ballot papers. So once the voting process ends, we secure the ballot boxes. The presiding officer will give party agents a few minutes of a break. They reconvene, they switch off their phones. Everybody is in quarantine until we produce a result for that voting station. So we count in the presence of party agents and observers where they are present. Party agents can raise objections as it relates to the count. So we count, the party agents, the presiding officer then completes a result slip in duplicate. The one is left at the venue so that everybody has access to it. The other result slip is transported in a tamper evident envelope to a local IEC capturing site. At the point where we finish the count, party agents and observers may take pictures of the result slip so that they have a record. And that we find very helpful, because I will illustrate why that is important. So a party captures the result slip and they send it to their party war rooms, whatever they call them, so that the party people who are sitting with us at the result operating centers, because they have access to the scanned images, they can compare the image that we've received and scanned into our system if the number of votes for parties equal the number of votes that were captured at the voting station, to obviate instances of interference with the result slip en route between the voting station and the local office of the IEC. So party agents sign the result slips. At least the party that has won or done well in the voting will always sign the result slip. Because when we count, you put on piles. So if Maseko sees that the pile for my party is not moving, they lose interest in everything. At the earliest opportunity, they leave the voting station. So we then transport the result slip to our local capturing site. The first thing that happens when we get there is that we inspect whether the tamper evident envelope has been tampered with. If it's not, we tear it open, remove the result slip, and scan it into the result slip. So we make an image of the result slip as received from the voting station. And once we've made that image, then our staff start the process of capturing. They don't capture off the scanned image, they capture off the hard copy. And it's a double blind capture. You capture for the first time, the screen goes blank. You capture for the second time, and only if the parameters meet between the first capture and the second capture is the result you are able to proceed. And once you've captured that result, begins the process. We employ independent audit firms, then who will compare the result as entered on the system and the image to say if the figures and the result have been captured correctly for the same party. If the results on the scanned image and the captured results do not match, the auditor rejects that image and it must go restart the process of recapturing. And once the auditors are happy that the scanned image and the captured results match, will they then enter their own unique code to authorize that those results can go into the results system. At that point, the results become available to everybody. That's the first time that I get to see the result. I don't know what happened. That's the first time I get to see the results. Party agents, parties who are represented at the results center will also have access to those results. People who have APIs approved and authorized by the Electoral Commission, like media houses and those type of people, will also be able to see those results. So the benefit of that thing is that, and it's transparency that we do not find in most jurisdictions, including in first world jurisdictions, where contestants can call up a result system for a single voting station to say, in this voting station, I want to compare the result as I received on my phone from my party agents with what the IEC has captured. And you can do it for all the voting stations in the country. And once we have all the results, we also place them, we give them to contestants to say, here are the results per voting station. Go and check them. And certify yourself that this result represents the result that were captured by you at the voting station. This slide summarizes the result capturing system. I don't know why this thing keeps on moving. The exception here is that there are two additional steps. Once the auditor has authorized the results that this result is correct, it can proceed. We have then automated intelligence, which goes and checks for exceptions. For example, what we mean by exception, it says party A in the same voting station received 200 votes on the PR ballot and 1,000 votes on the ward ballot or on the other ballot. So it throws up an exception. It doesn't say the result is wrong, but it says there is a pattern, mismatch in the pattern of behavior by voters. Investigate the result before it proceeds. So that helps us, or for example, in a voting station with 2,000 registered people, voter turnout is 2,000 or is 1,800. We know voter turnout never breaches 80%. So we build those parameters to say in this voting station, there's very, very high voter turnout. Just verify if this thing is correct. And in some instances, it makes sense. For example, Joubert Park is the biggest voting station in the country, 14,000. It's a transport node. So in national and provincial elections, we found that people who are en route would descend on that station to vote before they proceed to their destination. Oh, okay. Can you go back 2 slides? Yeah, go forward once. Thank you. So the auditors audit here, we save and print file, and there we run exceptions. And then the only way to correct a result that has been confirmed by an auditor is to request for an edit window, which means I ask that this result slip be returned to the point of capture, which is a local office, for recapture. And it must be authorized at 2 layers. It is requested at the municipal level, it's supported by a person in the province, and it's authorized by a user at the national office. And they have at most about 40 minutes to resolve and recapture that edit window for that result. And all of that information is available to contestants to know which result slips have been finalized, which result slips have been sent back for recapture, which result slips have generated exceptions. The existing controls, next slide, sir. The existing controls I've spoken to party agents, photographic images. The things that we need to improve on are the following, and you'll see in the next slide that I'll project. Because the number of contestants and parties change with each election, we must make manual intervention when we print the result slips. And because people capture first on a piece of paper in a voting station diary, when they move those result slips from the draft into the result slip, sometimes they get the party orders wrong, or because the party names are almost the same, you get the votes for the IEC given to another party and those type of things. So the exception is intended also to deal with those things. But in some instances, even with the exceptions, there's a few that fall off the crack. So going forward, what we will do is that for each voting station, as we print the ballot paper, we will also print a ballot slip, a result slip that follows the sequencing of parties on that ballot, on that result slip, especially when a result slip goes beyond a single page, so that it makes it easier for parties, for party agents and our staff to capture results correctly first time at voting station. The Commission has also authorized an additional training day to focus on results processing, completion of the result slip, and all those related things. Next slide, sir, and I'm about to conclude. This slide just summarizes instances of results that we have had to deal with after the Commission had approved the results. There were 144 instances where results had to be reopened after the results were announced. And in all those instances, the majority are in the Western Cape, followed by KZN. The thing that happened was that in the Western Cape, there was confusion in some stations between Cape Exit Party and one other party. And because we could not reconstruct the result, the Commission authorized a recount of those ballots. So we took the ballot boxes out in the presence of party agents, recounted them for the first time, and corrected the results. The total number of ballots remained the same, but the allocation to parties changed because we had captured results against wrong parties. So this will be helped if we have a dummy capture that mimics the ballot paper so that you do not transpose votes for wrong parties. Next slide, sir. Next slide. Next slide. Yeah. This talks to the voters' roll as it stands. Females continue to be the majority of registered voters. They also are the majority of voters, and they're the majority of well-behaved voters. Except for 2021, in all elections, an election is, by this time, 11 o'clock, an election is either won or lost because the majority of voters have voted, primarily female. And we have then a trend in the afternoon, very close to close of voting station. We have a spike in turnout, and invariably they're males. And in some instances, not well behaved. So the majority of our staff and those who are managers at voting stations are female. Next slide, sir. This is the breakdown of the voters' roll by age. So you'll see that our voters' roll goes against the grain. Consistent with the rest of sub-Saharan Africa, we are increasingly young population. However, the voters' roll, you could call it, it has an aging phenomenon because older persons are more represented on the voters' roll than young persons. We do not ascribe or use the word apathy in the Electoral Commission to describe the underrepresentation of young persons, because we know if we get it right and get them registered, they are 10 times more likely to participate than any age cohort. Of all the first-time voters that we registered ahead of 2021 election, among the age cohort 18 to 29, 81% of those turned up on voting day and voted. So the challenge and the campaign that we're going to be launched will still have a bias for young persons without alienating the older generation, so that we can get young people interested in the affairs of their country. Next slide, sir. Next slide. This slide, what Dr. Masuku said, is that we have decent data at our disposal that should be consumed by South Africans. This slide just gives you the registration patterns by age. So the colors will represent areas where you'll find a concentration of voters in that age bands. The yellow represents the 18 to 19-year-olds, and the blue represents the 50 to 59-year-olds. So we can give you the registration pattern by province, by municipality, by ward, and even at the voting station level. I don't have authority to say this, but I think we can spare a copy of the digital mainstay production that we do in-house. We call it the Atlas of Results. Atlas of Results will tell you from elections from 1999, the performance of a party in a geographic area against its competitors, against itself. And so it shows you the voter behavior, whether voting patterns have changed in certain geographic areas, whether where parties used to be strong, they're still strong, or if there is a change in voting pattern. The next slide, which will continue slide, will have just the listing of voting stations by type. Next slide. Next slide, sir. Yeah, this is just the summary of voting station by type. We have 30 mobile stations. Mobile stations are those stations, and it's going to be counterintuitive with what I say. They are mostly in sparsely populated areas, but you see the Northern Cape has nothing, which is counterintuitive. For example, Mpumalanga will have a lot because mostly they'll be in the Kruger Park. So where we have a vehicle instead of a voting station, moving from camps in that park to register for people to vote. We have permanent voting stations, which are the majority, and stubbornly we still have 928 temporary voting stations. Temporary voting stations where we have no community amenity. There's no school, no church, or if there's a school or a church, they refuse us permission to use their facilities. So we have to pitch a tent. Unfortunately, this coexists with areas of African habitation, and it communicates a message that people are unequal. That is the sad reality of our development in the country. We do our best to improve them, to make them habitable for people to use as voting station, but on our preference would have everyone voting in proper brick and mortar structures as voting stations. I've already spoken, next slide, sir. I've already spoken to this slide, so I won't repeat it. As way of closing remarks, what the presentation sought to do was to demonstrate that an election arises out of a confluence of a number of factors. First, it is a legislated environment. So the law has been passed. We know there are at least two constitutional court challenges to the law. On our part, we persist to prepare on the basis that an election must be held no later than August next year in terms of the law as it stands. If the Court rules otherwise, we will adjust our plans. Just by way of summary to say what is in front of the court. There are two constitutional court challenges. The first one is by the Independent Candidate Association. The second one is by One South Africa movement. In both the applications, the founding affidavits are signed by one person. The expert is one person in both the applications. In the second application, the Rivonia cycle has asked the court, and the court has agreed to grant it a amicus status, friend of the court. In the first application, the Independent Candidate Association, the attack is very narrow. The association takes issue with the split of seats in the National Assembly, 200-200. They want the court to read in a remedy that says the seats in the National Assembly are split 350 and 50. 50 to restore proportionality and 350 to be contested by independents and by parties. In the second application, the One South Africa movement, there are two challenges. The first one is a challenge against the requirement that unrepresented parties and independent candidates must demonstrate support equivalent to 15% of voters in the previous election. The second challenge, they take issue with the method set out in Schedule 1A of recalculating votes in the event there's a forfeiture of a seat or where an independent candidate loses membership of the Legislative Assembly mid-year, how we recalculate the seat to award that seat. The court has reserved judgment, but it understands that there is quite agency to the matter. In all the cases, the Commission filed a motion to abide, but also filed an explanatory affidavit, because that court said in previous judgments it is not advisable for it to determine election matters without having benefit of the Commission's view. So whether we are a litigant or not, the court will insist that we file an explanatory affidavit that advises the court on the choices that are brought before it. The second issue is that an election is an administratively involved exercise. As I said, we've confirmed, we will be confirming shortly all our staff that will use in voting stations. We have updated our systems to give effect to the legal scheme as it exists, as it includes the participation of independents. The third thing is that an election is a logistically involved undertaking. And I stand here and assure you that as it relates to material for voting stations, for registration weekend one, we have all the materials in hand. From that perspective, we can say we are ready. We will conclude the contracting of voting stations at the end of October, and then we can say we have access to all voting stations that we need for these elections. But most importantly, I think an election is about people. So in that regard, we will open all our network of voting stations to enable people to register and update their details. We will also do a comparison between what Stats SA says are the estimated number of people in the country, what Department of Home Affairs has on the population register, and what we have on the voters roll, to identify localities where there's underrepresentation of people, to get a better understanding of the demographics, and design strategies to target those communities. Ahead of registration weekend one, we will have a targeted voter registration. So where we go into areas of low registrations or areas where, owing to the changes in political boundaries, be they VD boundaries or ward boundaries, the registration of people have been affected. In October, we will launch the logo of this election, and we'll also start the campaign to animate South Africans. Hopefully, we are still able to run a positive campaign that says to South Africans, it is in your hands, you have a chance to do something, to use your vote to effect the change you want to see. All the work that we do means nothing. It comes to naught if it doesn't find expression at the level of a voting station. If on voting day, we can't say to every South African that comes to a voting station. The right to vote, as the Concord has said, is a badge of personhood. It must communicate to that person that in spite of your circumstances, you still matter, and that in spite of your standing in life, at least in the eyes of the Commission, your vote is equivalent, is not less than a vote of any other person. So if you can achieve that in the 23,300 voting station, we would have vindicated the constitutional promise of all citizens in the country. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Masuku, for the very elaborate and very clear presentation. And I don't know about you, but I think it's an impressive presentation of our state of readiness. How about we put our hands together again for? We are going to run a Q&A session so that if there are any questions of clarification that you would like, that those could be addressed. Obviously, Dr. Masuku and Dr. Masuku will be able to take all of those questions. We'll permit a shorter time than we anticipated earlier, because I think we lost time at the beginning. So if you want to raise your questions together, maybe we'll bundle them together so that the responses can come for them en bloc. Anyone with questions this side? Okay, I see 3 questions for. Is it okay if we take 4 of them together? Okay, let's do that.
Okay, good morning.
Maybe if we self-identify as we do that.
No problem.
Yeah.
Good morning. Thank you for brilliant presentations. My name is Kenny Mawasa. I run a small NGO, IDISA, International Disarmament Initiative of South Africa. Yeah, one of those laptop NGOs. So quickly, on system enhancement, and maybe before I go into that, let me just qualify this. There's a notion of South African exceptionalism, that, you know, there's certain things that they don't apply to South Africa. For instance, in the presentation, I didn't hear the hedging of the obvious meaning, you know, load shedding and natural disasters, etc., etc. You know, I didn't hear a comment that really catered for that around or during the election period. So that's one. Quickly on system enhancement, how do you hedge against, say, for instance, robot voters, geopolitics, you know, exopolitics as well? I know we don't expect aliens to influence our elections in one way or another, but other states, other countries take it very, very, very seriously. You know, mechanism to mitigate, you know, because remember, most of the stats that we looked at is elections before your GPT-4 and, you know, all the machine learning have advanced to the level where they are today. So now we're looking from about 16, 17 months from now, as they advance exponentially, what sort of impact is likely to have on our voters? I think something that we cannot take for granted. And quickly, my last point is on overseas voters. Based on what I know, regions such as South America, Southeast Asia, including to some level, Central America, is well represented. No, it's less represented in terms of our missions. What is it has been, you know, what sort of mechanism are there to enable the people that will be there, who live there, or who will be traveling in those parts of the world to actually vote properly? Thank you.
Thank you. I think the next one was over here. Yeah. Is it yours?
Good morning. My name is Molatelo. I'm from Stand Up SA. I've just got a couple of questions. Thank you for the presentation. Number one, we are going on an election drive where we're going to be conscientizing voters and encouraging voter registration all over the country. So I just have a couple of questions with regards to the IEC and how we can collaborate. Are we allowed to use IEC branding, for example, your logos, when we do our posters and flyers and stuff, along with ours, of course, when you go to do those registrations and activations? And does the IEC have funding for NGOs or NPCs that are assisting people with registration? Because I mean, we will be using data and such logistics. And then sorry, and then is there any channels that we need to go through in order for the IEC to sort of support us or to come on board and then do this registration, education, voter education exercise with us? Because I think it's very important going into next year's elections that we have as many people as possible registering to vote, because I think it's going to be a very important election next year. Yeah, that's all from our side. Thank you.
Okay, while we go to the next one, just to say that there are obviously others who are online who are welcome to share their questions on the chat group, and we'll also be channeling those questions over to our guests to be able to answer them. So if we can bring this first round will be for those who are in the room, and then the next round will be for those that are outside. I think there was okay.
Yeah, thank you very much for a brilliant presentation. My name is Chelza Sikwari Chibasa from Defend Our Democracy, the DOT. I only have one question. My question is in regard to, like you mentioned, the issue that after election processes, like party agents will be allowed to take pictures, and they can then send those pictures to their political respective organizations. So you further stated that after the election capture by the IEC, organizations are allowed to raise grievances if the picture which they were given by their party agent is not corresponding to the final capture by the IEC. They are allowed to raise grievances. So my question is, like, if the party agent picture, the result from the party agent is not corresponding with the final capture by the IEC, what happens after? Like, are we going to have a recounting or re-election to that particular voting station, or what? Like, I just want to understand there, if you compare the result and they are not corresponding, what happens after? Thank you.
Okay, I think we can pause there because there are a whole number. Okay, let's take one more.
Thank you very much. I have a few, but I'm sure, quick answers. Our deputy mentioned that they will use the stats SA data. I just want to check with you, are they up to date? It has been previously that sometimes the stats SA data may be manipulated or not up to date. So if we can just have that confirmation. The second is that you mentioned about the offline mode of the voter management system, which also came up from the IDASA gentleman, is that would that be charged consistently so that if there's any power outage? Secondly, is would it have data as in the internet consistently so that it's managed effectively? The next question I have is more suggestion on the data capture, that you upfront need very good, excellent data capturers, so you don't have to waste time in recapturing and mistakes. I think that needs to be ensured. So that's more a statement and a comment. And then lastly is about the elderly. I know previously voting the day before, elderly people were allowed to vote, so they don't stand into long queues. I just want to know if it's still going to be the same. Thank you very much.
Good. Let's pause there, and then we'll combine those questions with those that have come in the meantime from online. Thank you. Yeah, welcome to, or maybe you can understand it. Yeah. I don't know if we lose.
Thank you. I've grabbed the mic because I want to deal with the easier questions, the difficult ones, to Dr. Masuku. Stats SA data, we take it as we receive it and we assume that it's credible, because that's the only other data that we have and we can rely on. And we've always done that, and we've not had issues with the credibility of the data. The offline and online route. Offline deals with two things, where the device cannot establish a connection or the connection is poor. We know we struggled in 2021 when we used it for the first time, where network was not too good. The gadget persisted to try to establish a connection. So we've improved that so that after 7 seconds, the machine just defaults into an offline mode. It stores the data on its hard drive, and as soon as it can restore a good connection, it transmits the transactions, even unbeknown to the operator. And the good thing is that we've removed the need for an operator to switch between modes. It does that based on whether it's able to find connectivity or what. The battery charge on the device is very good. It can retain a charge for a number of hours, but it also comes with peripherals like an external battery. It also comes with power socket. You can charge onto a 12-volt socket. The special votes indeed will have a period of special votes where people who either because of advanced age, infirmity, or absence from their voting stations can apply, and if approved, they'll vote on the 2 days preceding voting day. An important thing, and thank you for raising the special votes, an important thing that we did not raise in the presentation, which is key, is that in 2003, the law was changed to introduce Section 24, capital A. That was a narrow and well-meaning exception in the law that a person registers and votes in an area in which they are registered. The law was changed to make an exception for people who found themselves unavoidably outside voting station where they are registered. Let's take an example, an emergency worker, a doctor, a paramedic who has to work on voting day, or a truck driver who's en route to Richards Bay, they're registered in Northwest, they find themselves in Mpumalanga on voting day. But for Section 24A, they will not be able to participate and shape affairs in their country. So it was a well-meaning, narrow exception to the law. But over time, it has become anything but. It is now used by voters and political parties to shop for voting stations with shorter queues. And it plays havoc with our logistics. And then out of that began the perception that people saying, I voted at my station and proceeded to vote elsewhere. So in 2019, in 2021, Parliament looked at this and amended Section 24A. It is still available, but no longer available for application at the voting station. There will be a period in the election timetable where you pre-notify the IEC of your intention to vote outside of your voting station and indicate a voting station at which you will vote. That way, you give us a number of days and we are able then to populate your ID number at the receiving voting station so that when you arrive there, they are able to assist you. Ndayando, the result slip that a party agent sends is just to say, this is a result that has left the station. If what we capture is different from that, there must be an explanation. And usual explanation would be, for example, that no, having worked for 3 days with little sleep, the presiding officer, when they tally their votes, they recorded figures against wrong parties or those type of things. So those things you are able to clarify and recapture the result system. So when you recapture the result system, there'll always be an explanation in the exception windows to say this result system, this result changed because of 1, 2, and 3. And if we change it in the presence of party agents that must also sign the thing. Another thing that I didn't mention is that result slip go to unique, they are printed for unique voting station with a unique barcode. So if for whatever reason we need to regenerate a new result slip, there must be a request and an explanation what happened to the original result slips that were issued. And in all instances, you must capture both the result slips. So the old ones, so that there's a paper trail to say, this is the first result that was captured. It was wrong. It has been changed this way. This is the final thing. So everything will be on the results system so that if you need to go back, you can access all those results onto the system. So a recent capture does not remove or delete the original capture. It just updates and keeps a file of the number of times that result slip is scanned and captured. The funding of NGOs and branding, I'll leave that to Dr. Masuku. Kenny, we've bent our fingers in the past and we've been disabused of the notion of exceptionalism. We know we're not exceptional. And I didn't raise the question of load shedding, results of climate change and those type of things. Was we accept them as a reality that we must plan for. And on voting day, I can say this without fear of contradiction, we don't have challenges of load shedding. We have challenges of mischief where people go and interfere with the grid, turn off power. It's not an issue of load shedding. We will be meeting with ESCOM as we usually do to get a sense, to give them planning scenarios to say, here are the critical days and times. Can you work your maintenance such that we have minimal interventions on that day? The issue of natural disasters we can plan for, but as we know, they can be devastating, localized or in broad areas. In those instances, you'll see that the commission, if it can help it, never schedules an election, even though it is not a decision, never schedule an election on the last day in the 90-day period. We normally buy a few weeks so that if voting can happen in those instances, the commission can still reauthorize a revote or a new election day, which election day must still be within the 90-day determined in terms of the constitution. The issue of voting station is true. Overseas, so for South Africans that vote overseas, the issue was raised in Parliament to say, for example, take Colombia. If you're in Colombia, you must travel to Venezuela to access diplomatic services. If you are in Australia, you can only vote in Canberra. So those things were raised, but Parliament said we recognize only the missions that they cooperate and nothing else. So that is the situation as it stands.
Thank you very much. I'm going to begin with the questions from the floor. The first one is from Kenny about how do you hedge against cyber influence, the interference of bots, and you are by implication talking about the real threat of algorithms and the role that they play. I think what Masego illustrated is that we design our systems to counter that threat. So far, the system has held up, but we don't roll it out. So we watch it all the time. The greatest threat, I think, that we face in terms of algorithms, bots, chat, all of those are deepfakes, etc. It's in the atmosphere before elections. It is in the role of disinformation, etc. So what South Africa is doing is it has pioneered guidelines in collaboration with Media Monitoring Africa and the platform owners themselves to impose upon them, to lean on them, to do what it is that they can in order to manage that. It's not foolproof. It is work in progress across the whole world, but we are working on that one. So I can't give you a foolproof answer that it won't happen. It is something that we watch all the time. We have a group of civil society in South Africa who do nothing else around election time, but to make sure that they pick up what is happening on social media platforms and they counteract it the best way that they can. So we do takedowns, we do those kinds of things, but that's a real threat. Okay. And then the other issue, the issue of collaboration, Stand Up South Africa. The duty to educate, to mobilize, to advocate does not lie with the Electoral Commission only. Okay, so if we were to pass money from the Electoral Commission to civil society, we'd have to run a tender and then allocate, etc., so that it's a transparent process and you touch wood that in itself is not corrupted. So what the Electoral Commission does is that it avails itself to support anyone in the field who wants to do that work. The use of our logo, we prefer that people do not use the IEC logo, because what people do is they go to our website, they download the logo, and they superimpose it on materials that we cannot speak out for. So the advice that we would give to you is that come and have a chat with us, so that you can take the information that we have that is true, and then you can use it in order to do your work. And we hope that you have a natural footprint that you work with. But we normally work with civil society in the spaces that they work, and we help them in where they are. So different people need different things. For example, people come and say, I have my own materials. We read through those materials to make sure that they are indeed accurate. But I would dissuade you from using the logo of the IEC, because if everyone does, then people don't know what comes from the Electoral Commission and what doesn't. So that should be the answer that I have for you. If I may, and just go to the questions. Mine. Let's begin with the easiest one. That says that who is the independent audit colleagues? For everything that we do, we run a public process. You want that list, you can get it. We can give you the people that run successful tenders. We can give you that list. We can give you the short list. We can give you the person that is awarded the tender. Any tender in the Electoral Commission. Any. It does not matter which part of it. Nothing is secret today. So anytime that you want that information, you have our contacts. Make sure that you have our numbers, and we will let you know. The problem with democracy, of course, is that to defend it, you have to work 24/7. There's no out. There's no rest. You can't defend a democracy unless you're willing to be vigilant 24/7. There's no downtime. Okay, so yes, you can do that. There's another question that says that why don't we give you the list of managers that we have? We have lists of every single person. Remember what Masaka said? The recruitment process goes through the party liaison committee. One piece of information: if you don't sit in the National Party Liaison Committee, you can apply to the commission and ask to be co-opted onto the party liaison committee. So then the commission grants you the permission to do that. So you're part of the debates on anything and everything that happens. Those lists that you want, they are available. If you want the list of managers, they're available. You can have them. Okay, but remember, the information regulator is also on our case about the kind of information that you give to people, personal detail. So we will give you information insofar as we are in compliance with what the information regulator says, but the list of our managers, our area managers, voting station staff, all of that, they're available to you. Mr. Atkins, hi, how are you doing? The question, you don't ask a question, you say you want to know, I'll ask Masego to do that. You and I, we can continue the conversation a little bit later. I'm going to hand the mic over to Masego, and we'll talk about the other things that are.
The question from Mr. Atkins, it relates to a question we dealt with already, the limitation placed on Section 24A, that it is no longer available at the voting station by pre-notification to obviate instances of people being able to vote more times than they are entitled. The independent firm, the list of firms that we appoint, once we've appointed them, are available on their website and the Treasury website, the list of service providers we issue tenders to. What is the deadline for registration of political parties for 2024 elections? Political party registration is continuous. There is no deadline. The only guide we can help you with is that come the date of candidate nomination closure, by that day you should have a party registered in order to be able to nominate candidates. I know it's not helpful, but it's a continuous thing. There's no cut-off period. Statistics on election violence. We have a capacity in provinces and in municipalities to deal with the environment before and after election. And it's something, it is at its nascent stage, but we are beginning to map instances of violence that are related to elections and to report on those. So we should be able to provide a report on instances of violence that are related to elections. Access to API, it's Mr. Kenny. I could leave my contacts with the organizers so that you say, I don't have the details now, but if you send it to me, we'll make sure that we give you the requirements for getting access to an API. Ella Gandhi, in other countries, especially Chile, they prohibit posters. In South Africa, the commission does not have authority to manage party campaign finance. We manage funding of political parties, which is a distinct environment from managing party campaigns and putting caps on campaigns. So if that is a requirement, I think it's a requirement that should be taken via the parliamentary process so that a scheme is enacted that we or any other authority can enforce. The Home Affairs discovered 500,000 fraudulent IDs. The Department of Home Affairs is a custodian of the National Population Register. When a person applies for registration, because the Constitution says only South Africans, only citizens can be on the voters' roll, we run a comparison between that ID number that we receive and the voters' roll and the National Population Register. If the National Population Register confirms that that is an ID valid of a South African and they've attained the age of majority, we place that person on the voters' roll, no questions asked. If having registered that person, Home Affairs comes back and says that ID number is no longer a South African citizen, the person falls off the voters' roll because we run comparisons on a monthly basis, both for against the totality of the voters' roll. So when we register at that point, when we come to a voting station, When we scan your ID number, it runs already against the population register. That's why we can give you an answer to say you have been registered or you have been declined because your ID number is not South African. And every month thereafter, we maintain the voters roll by running comparisons with the population register. So it is possible that in March you would have been on the voters roll, and come July you are no longer on the voters roll because your status has changed at the Department of Home Affairs. We can't correct it. The correction must happen at the source of registry of citizenship. The issue about the facilities that we use, yes, when we conclude the contracting of facilities in October this year, we'll have an idea of the state of each of those voting stations, whether the classrooms are big enough, the number of classrooms that we need, the halls that we need. You'll see in other instances, we may use a library and also erect tents outside just to deal with the flow of voters. The difficulty is that we do not own voting stations, so we use them as we find them. Issues of ramps, we try to implore schools, churches to make steady ramps so that people who are disabled can also be able to access voting station. There's a question from Felix News 24 on the budget for the IEC and how the medium-term budget cuts will affect the Electoral Commission and possible budget cuts. Look, we appreciate, we are acutely aware that we work within a national fiscal framework and that whatever happens to the national fiscals impacts us. But up to now, National Treasury has always put resources at our disposal to enable us to do the country duty. We know that we are in a fiscal squeeze and that entities have been asked to rein in expenditure. We have submitted a motivation to National Treasury yesterday. We're hoping for a positive answer. The short question is, barring any further cuts, we are sufficiently funded to deliver the mandate next year. And National Treasury has never been difficult with us. We've been funded, not to the extent that we like, but we've been funded to deliver a decent election. Earliest date of elections is the 22nd
August.
May, latest around 14th May, yes. Okay. Voters without identification, will they be able to use date of birth info, or will it be? Unfortunately, for purposes of registration, it is not in the regulations. It is in the law itself. You require a ID document, physical ID document, a smart card, or if you don't have those, a valid temporary identification certificate issued by the Department of Home Affairs. In all instances, when we run registration weekend, the Home Affairs maintains its office network open for the duration of the registration weekend. So if you've mislaid your ID, you can go to Home Affairs and get a temporary identification certificate. Yeah, but driver's license, passports, date of birth, baptismal certificates, unfortunately, are not valid. Thank you.
Just one more question: that could any court challenge change the election date outside this range? We don't think so, because in 2021, the Constitutional Court ruled that it does not have the appetite of elections being run outside the 90-day window. So we hope not to touch it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's put our hands together again for the IEC. Thanks, Dr. Masuku. Thanks, Dr. Masuku. I'm going to then, with this indication of darkness, I shall leave the stage and invite our colleague, CEO of Defender of Democracy, Zakira Badi, and from me, Mohsen. I will then be handing over the facilitation to Zakira for the rest of the day.
Thanks for that, Reverend Moss. I'm going to ask that the next presentation be screened. Here we can go to the next slide. Oh, okay. Okay, thanks for that. Okay, so I think we've heard from the IEC basically the gist of how the electoral cycle works, how the processes are run, and some of the issues that we need to be flagging as well. From Defend Our Democracy, we've put together a set of issues that we think civil society needs to be looking at during this period. And I'm going to raise some of them, go into details about our proposal in relation to some of these issues. And then we'd come to the discussion session, which is really mapping out which organizations are doing different areas of work, how do we link up with them, how do we collaborate. So one issue that we have flagged is the usage of state resources for campaigning. And I think we've seen examples in the past where perhaps there's money allocated to a particular department and suddenly that department puts out advertisements that are colored in a particular color of a political party instead of the usual colors of that department. So sometimes it's not overtly evident that this is happening, but it may be there. Questions about all of a sudden before the election period, mass scale job employment opportunities in government, capitulating to different demands at different levels of different sectors of society. So I think those are the issues that we need to monitor. But this element of work really requires organizations who have the capacity to monitor budgets, to go into the detail of it, and to flag where these issues begin to emerge. The IEC mentioned the issue of party funding. The recent Political Party Funding Act, through the work of My Vote Counts and others, has enabled transparency in this area of work. And here there's already a set of organizations through the My Vote Counts Collective that monitors the regular reporting of political parties to the IEC on this front. And I think that needs to be something that is stepped up during the election period as well. Then there's issues of populist policy positions that are aimed at electoral gain. And basically these issues tend to enhance societal division. And I think we're beginning to see in this electoral cycle, at least, the issue around migrants in the country playing up quite significantly. The recent Marshalltown fire, for instance, is one example where you see political parties with rhetoric that can be quite dangerous. And similarly, I think the kind of racial divisions in the country as well may be played up in this election. Electoral campaigning and no-go areas. Here, I think it's the kind of issue of elections violence. Some civil society organizations previously have reported that in particular provinces, you are not very welcome as an election observer. There may be issues of violence preceding the elections. We know there are certain areas where councillors are assassinated, for example, and that in itself may be an area of concern to flag. The issue of misinformation and disinformation was raised quite strongly. Along with, I think, Media Monitoring Africa, there's the Legal Resources Center yesterday that launched a campaign against disinformation during this period. And again, that's the responsibility, I think, of civil society organizations to pay close attention to. Manifestos and candidate quality. So we may, number one, focus on the issue of the electoral process and ensuring its integrity. But how do we ensure that after this election, we get the type of government and the type of candidates who are honest and who are accountable to the public? The issue of electoral reform, I think, is curtailed in some way given the limitations of the Electoral Amendment Act currently. So there's no direct oversight over candidates. So people who, form part of the electorate cannot directly hold accountable their candidates. In many ways, that direct linkage of accountability is still via the political party. So in the lead up to this election, I know that there are a few organizations, the Social Justice Assembly, Rivonia Circle, and Kagiso Trust and others that are beginning to look at this issue of political party manifestos. What's the minimum basics that civil society wants to put through to political parties, that we want to hold political parties accountable to? What's the kind of criteria that we assess candidates of political parties on the basis of, and how do we ensure that political parties are put under pressure in this regard? Coalition governments will be, it's not something new for the country given our experiences at the local government level, but there is some anticipation, projection from political analysts that the next period will see coalition governments at a provincial level at the very least, potentially at a national level, and civil society will begin to grapple with how it relates to this issue. We know that the Office of the Deputy President has spoken about the issue of coalition governments. There was a national dialogue that took place in Cape Town recently. And then you have political parties themselves that are coming into different forms of pacts. But civil society, to a large degree, in some ways, some instances may have been consulted, but our voice may be a bit absent on this front. What do we want out of coalition governance in the country? Then there's democracy education, how to vote, and then who to vote for, on what basis do you vote for them. And I don't think any civil society organization, if it wants to maintain a sense of non-partisanship, is going to necessarily say vote for party X. There have been instances where civil society organizations have ventured into that terrain. But how do we give voters a sense of, and again, it goes to this minimum agenda that we want to put to political parties. How do we give people the basis on which to evaluate political parties? Voter registration drives. This is particularly important because we can have an election where a minimum number of registered voters come out to vote. And the election process will be, the integrity of it will be maintained. Even if there's one person that comes out to vote in an election and that one person votes for a particular political party, that political party wins the election. But does it mean that it enjoys the legitimacy of the broader public? I think not. So in this instance, the importance is to get as many voters registered and out on election day. And we've seen through the Afrobarometer report, for example, in 2021, where less people have trust in our democratic systems. Less people have trust in our democratic institutions, and therefore civil society, the responsibility really lies with us to begin to see how to bridge that trust deficit, and to assure people that through this election they can actually effect change, if that's what they would like to see. If they would like to maintain the current status quo, that's what they can do through their vote as well. Election observing and results announcement. Sorry, on voter registration, there are a number of organizations, Activate, Groundwork Collective, Future Elect, that are beginning to do work in this area. Significantly, we've heard that through Groundwork Collective, they've recently registered about 10,000 people in this last period alone. So I think there's phenomenal work being done there. And just to add that on the voter education front, I see the Hans Seidel Foundation is here as well. Through Civics Academy, there's some work being done in that regard as well. And then on election observer and results announcement, in the previous election, we've had through Activate, the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation, at least 200 young people that have gone out to voting stations in different parts of the country, volunteered as citizen observers for the elections. This election, our call is really to step that up. There are over 23,000 voting stations across the country, and we want as many civil society organizations and individuals to come on board and observe the elections, form part of a collective of organizations that are doing this work, so that we can really map out where the gaps, how those gaps need to be filled. And ultimately, civil society must be able to have a view on whether the elections have maintained the level of integrity that was required or not. And there were examples Reverend Moss raised earlier where you have instances in different parts of the world. If you take the example of Brazil, of the US, where Trump and Bolsonaro come about and dispute the election results on a whim, civil society must be able to counter that if that happens here. And then lastly is the issue of electoral reform before and after 2024. We've now reached a stage where the Electoral Reform Act has been passed. As was mentioned by the IEC, there are some organizations, some within the political sphere, who are countering this act, and it's yet to be seen what the pronouncement is on it. But after the 2024 election, how do we remobilize on this point? There is an opportunity once this ministerial panel will be set up for civil society once again to pronounce on the electoral reform systems and what is required to ensure that the accountability that we want of public representatives is maintained through a bit more of a direct sense than what currently is allowed for. So from Defend Our Democracy, what we are really proposing is some sort of a national campaign, an overarching campaign framework that is inclusive of organizations who are doing work on all of these fronts. And we are saying, at least from our side, the focus should be on observing the 2024 elections. We think there's a need for people to identify as guardians of democracy wherever they are. And what this campaign allows for is at a very micro level. So in any community across the country, someone can register to be an elections observer as part of their country duty, go to the voting station closest to where their home is, observe the elections, and be part of a broader national campaign that then collates that data. And that data is then fed through to the organizations who are doing the analysis work. And we'll see in the upcoming slides how that information can be processed at a later stage. So what we're calling for is a campaign to observe and pronounce on the integrity and success of the 2024 elections. And this is in no way to assume the role of the IEC in pronouncing on the integrity of the elections, because that's the primary body that will do this. But it's really to corroborate the statistics that come through to where there's a need, as with the previous elections, for example, where civil society organizations can enhance the capacity of those in the IEC that are doing their work on the day. It's to do that. To counter disinformation and any form of political destabilization in the electoral cycle. So it can be prior to the elections, if we see there's a kind of grocery hamper distribution that's taking place as part of electioneering and the buying of votes through that process. It's about countering it throughout that cycle. And the long-term advantage of this campaign is that leading towards 2026 and 2029, we can begin to develop a set of democracy volunteers throughout the country. So we know that from now up until elections, whether it's in May or August, it's an exceptionally short time to build a set of, if we take 23,000 voting stations times 2 people, whatever, you'd probably need in excess of 50,000 volunteers on the day of elections. It's a very short time to do this, but if we meet certain targets for this election, we build towards 2026, we build towards 2029, in anticipation that each of these elections will be even more hotly contested than the one before it. By 2029, we can have, democracy volunteers throughout the country who are committed to ensuring the integrity of the elections. For this election, we want to build a database of 11,500 organizations. And this is at a maximum. I know that others are saying we need to be a bit more cautious with this figure, possibly about 2,500 organizations at a minimum. We want to build a database of 50,000 individuals. That's the aim for now. We want to draw in the strategic support of civil society organizations and networks. We want the support of well-known South African individuals, so artists, football players, rugby players, netball players, who can endorse this campaign and urge their own constituencies and fellowship to be part of it. We want to conduct 9 very well publicized provincial meetings. For 2024, we think that the priority should be on Gauteng, Western Cape, and KwaZulu-Natal. That doesn't mean we're not going to focus on Limpopo or the Northwest. It just means that we're being realistic about what may be possible for this election. We want to host a series of very high impact events, and I'll come to that in a bit. All of this needs to be underpinned by a very well-crafted media campaign. We want to consistently maintain weekly convenings. And for the organizations that were part of the Orange Mask campaign previously, the electoral reform campaign, we found that it's quite useful where on a weekly basis, organizations just touch in on an online basis to indicate if there's any update on their side, what work are they involved in, can they link up with other organizations, who can they collaborate with. And then we want to develop the database management, monitoring, analysis, and technological capacity for this. And already I know from the side of Defend Our Democracy, we're looking at this. The SACC, Council of Churches, is looking at this. AUTA is looking at this issue as well. And then it's the training that will go with all of this work. So if there's an election observer who comes from an organization in Hammanskraal, how do we ensure that this volunteer knows how to use the app system that we're building, but at the same time, part of the IEC's own elections monitoring processes, has the IEC booklet, gets IEC accreditation, the BIP that goes with it, etc. And then working with the IEC to ensure that the logistics for this is successfully run, so that the accreditation processes are not something separate to what the IEC is developing. These are slightly old figures, but if we're looking at Gauteng province, for example, there are in excess of 2,100 voting stations. At each of these voting stations, can we get at least 2 people to be monitoring the elections? We've used these figures as a basis on which to look at the average number of organizations and individuals that we need to be reaching out to in different provinces. Why is this campaign important? I think we've spoken about the 2024 elections being very hotly contested, about this leading to 2026 and 2029 and the integrity of those 2 elections. Importantly, I think within the global context, and it's not mentioned here, yesterday the Legal Resources Center put out something that said that there are 65 countries across the globe that are having elections in 2024. And there are over 2 billion people that will be impacted by those elections directly. So I think within that context, South Africa has a responsibility to ensure the integrity of its own election process. And then lastly, we need to see the long-term value of building this organizational network and the network of individuals. So in a year's time from now, if there's a campaign around the Zondo Commission and implementing its recommendations as a matter of urgency, the same network of democracy volunteers who we know as organizations are already invested in the issue of democracy, we can rely on that network towards the campaign, for example, against state capture and corruption. Similarly, there may be other issues of democracy that we would want to promote. The same network of organizations can be brought into it on a long-term basis. So the logic behind this, because building towards a mass on this scale means that it would be entirely impossible for a single organization in this country as it stands to manage this process individually. And the idea behind it is that the set of organizations who want to take up this campaign make that national call, and we're looking at sometime next month about formally launching this campaign. There's the building of the organizational, technical, information, and communications base for this campaign. It's the facilitating and networking of interaction of organizations. So we know, for example, Media Monitoring Africa, Legal Resources Center, Africa Check is doing work on disinformation. How can they work collaboratively with each other? There are others that are trying to involve the business sector, like the In Transformation Initiative. How do we bring them on board as well? And then lastly, it's really about organizations at an individual, at a local level, adopting this call and beginning to run with it and plug into it at a national level. So there's absolutely no way that we would be able to, for example, oversee 500 observers in KZN going out, ensuring they get their airtime, their transport on the day, they're able to report back effectively. What it really requires is the organization based in that area taking on the responsibility of 10 people or 100 people, depending on their capacity and their ability to ensure that all of this works systematically, and then plugging into the broader technical system that will be developed. We've mapped out as Defend Our Democracy the pillars of work for this. So it's the communications campaign that is like the roof of this campaign, basically. And it really requires organizations adopting this on scale. It requires media companies, media organizations coming on board and supporting this work. It's about movement building, database building, organizing work, really getting the base of organizations across the country to support this. And that includes, at the level of like SGB associations, residents associations in different communities, convening core events that give sort of profile to this. And I'll come to that in the next slide. The technical processes, administration, logistics of a campaign like this. And then lastly, it's the finance, fundraising, and resourcing of that, which we think organizations at the micro level can begin to take up. So if you are able to see 2 volunteers through to monitor the elections, and that's what you can cater for, great. How do we plug those 2 volunteers into the system itself? On fundraising and resourcing, we're also looking at approaching some of the bigger tech companies, those who are involved in information technology, to assist. So how do we get, for example, MTN or Vodacom to zero rate the app that's being built to bring all of this together? Or how do we get retail stores to ensure that where there are people in their communities who are doing this monitoring work, maybe they have access to a food stipend, for example. So those are things that we're looking at in the longer term, but organizations do need to assume some sort of responsibility in terms of fielding volunteers and looking after them. And then lastly is the campaign phase that we're looking at. So I believe that the IEC has already opened up for elections observers. And we think between this period of September, October, civil society needs to coherently plan this campaign, develop its systems, put together thinking so that we can cohere with what the IEC is putting out. It's also the stakeholder engagement during this period, which is mapping out who are the organizations that are doing work, how we can collaboratively work together. Phase 2 is really looking at the public launch of this. So provincial visits, tech systems, training systems that go with it. Phase 3, we are looking at having a summit that deals with the issue of coalitions, deals with the issue of political party manifestos, a civil society agenda. And again, there are some organizations between October and November that are looking at that area of work. It's also the testing of the systems. It's the first registration weekend that will take place during that week as well. And then it's looking at the December period, which is anti-corruption week. And we think some of the campaign work can dovetail with anti-corruption week and the kind of messaging that goes with it. There would be a dip during the holiday period, but from January, February next year, it's all systems go again. And then it's looking at training, IEC training and systems that goes with it, the kind of accreditation processes. February is the SONA event that will be taking place in Cape Town. And civil society has traditionally held a rally prior to that. And we think, again, the messaging could be aligned. The next phase would be looking at a pre-election rally in Gauteng for civil society, with really the kind of messaging before election day itself. And the systems simultaneously taking place with all of this in terms of ensuring that we have coverage in all of the areas in at least the 3 provinces, KZN, Western Cape and Gauteng, and where there are other provinces that we're able to link up to as well. And then lastly, it's the election day period. How do we ensure that all of the processes align? How do we ensure that as information is coming through? So we're looking at a technical system that will allow, if you are a volunteer going into a voting station, you're able to log onto your app, indicate that you've now entered the voting station, mark off very much like the IEC booklet. Has the voting station opened on time? Yes. Was the ballot box emptied out or shown to be empty before voting started? Yes, no. If there's an indication of violence, you can tick it off, and that information begins to be fed live into the system. So if we see, for example, in Hammanskraal, that there are 10 volunteers that are saying that there's violence that is erupted, who is the team of people that we could have on standby to begin flagging that to the regional IEC officer that will be there to say, there's something brewing here, we're not too sure what's happening, but can you keep a check on it? And then post-elections, it's getting so auditors to come in, audit whatever we've managed to monitor. So if we've managed to monitor 10,000 voting stations, fantastic, that's what the auditor will look at. And what's the results that come out of that? Does it link up with what the IEC is saying? Does it link up with what's being said broadly by political parties? And how do we ensure that we get a set of credible people and organizations who are part of this campaign to then begin speaking about it post-elections? So that's what we're looking at. We see this as really phase A before leading to 2026 and 2029. It's a massive undertaking, and we think that it can only work if it has the buy-in of broader civil society. So that's what the phase looks like. And really the next segment is getting feedback from the organizations here and online. And if there's feedback from the IEC as well, we would welcome that. And then looking at who are the organizations who are doing work who we perhaps have not mentioned or we don't know about, and begin adding to that list of organizations so we know where to collaborate and work together. Thanks. Okay, I'm going to open up for questions, comments. Many, we can 1, 2, 3, and then we can go 4, 5.
Just two broad areas. The one is the plan, the observer plan. I think what would be better is if we could collaborate with political parties, particularly the smaller ones, because what you tend to find, you know, having been in that environment, what you tend to find is that the more central polling stations will have party agents from all the political parties. So there'll be 20 party agents in one station. Then you go to another station and there's only one political party. And that's where, you know, accusations of shenanigans happens. So if there's a coordination where you can speak to political parties and say, how do we train party agents? And then how do we ensure we distribute party agents so that every party, every polling station has more than one political party represented? And then in that way, we don't need observers everywhere. What you then have is on a municipal level, you have, instead of trying to get 22,000 times 2 people, all you need is 217 times 4. And then what you then do is you have as a different set of training so that the people in the center on the municipal level, you give them more training in terms of legality. Because here's the problem with party agents. You can give them basic training. This is what's supposed to happen. And if this doesn't happen, you must lodge an objection. But very often they don't know enough about the law as to what is illegal and what is legal. And they need another resource. They typically will then get onto the phone and try and phone somebody to find out, may a party agent do that or not? Can the presiding officer do that or not? Is that illegal in a ruling or not? And then you create that resource where the person can then say, yes, you can object to this, but no, you can't object to that. That's part of the process. I think it's a sort of a force multiplier. The The second issue, that's regarding the post-election discussion about what political or electoral system we want. We really need to have a debate about what's available to us, because we've got a whole lot of ideas and people really don't know the implications of each in terms of the quality of our, before we go around the country trying to persuade people of a new system, we need to have a debate of what's available. And, you know, my mind goes every time to Tlokwe. You know, our system failed in Tlokwe. And if we want to replicate that, I fear for our democracy in our country.
Thank you for the opportunity, Zakira. A vitally important discussion to be had in time for the election. My name is Sunny Morgan and I represent a civil society organization called Debt for Climate. But I have participated in every single election from the 94 election as a counting agent to a party agent and then to an elections observer. And I think that the elephant in the room this time is that the ruling party has never faced an election where the outcome is possibly not guaranteed and there's a loss of the election. So I wanted to ask this question in the first round. What is civil society's response, Defend Our Democracy's response, and the IEC's response to the possibility that the elections will be not the outcome and the results of the elections not will be legally contested, but just will not be accepted, and that the ruling party or other parties who lose will respond to violence or just not accept. We have had a phenomenal run of success from 94 up until today, where all parties respect the outcome of the elections. I fear for this election that that will not be the case. And while all of the preparations are taking place, we must be very conscious of the fact that this election is probably the most important election since 94, and that the outcome of that election will not be respected. And one other thing I wanted to do is return the bub from the last monitoring to an IEC official, which I didn't return. So here's it here. Thank you, comrade. There we go.
Thank you so much. Greetings, Nikki Webam from African Indigenous Leaders. I mostly represent the traditional leaders and also the people mostly in the rural areas, since it's also my passion to always speak from experience as well. One of the questions that I always have in mind is, what is democracy if we do not have the citizens going to vote? Like you have seen the numbers, they're really lower than what is expected. And now it's also a challenge, I think, to many of the democracy defenders or people that are into that space to find ways of saying that people, they still hope in the democratic system. Most of us have lost it. And secondly, I think there's a question that I was going to ask the IEC, but it was mostly a comment because I'm concerned with the numbers that are going to be in the ballot paper, the contestants and all that. And you find that sometimes even the ballot papers are printed very small. People can't even see the images and so on. So I think that's the point that I was going to raise. If maybe there is a poster that IEC makes, that like a bigger poster of the ballot paper where people can, before they go to the smaller version of the ballot, they see the images, they see the people, they actually, or screens maybe in more advanced areas where you can see the screens and the processes that you need to take the step by step so that people can not get stuck when they go and vote. Coming to the observations for elections, I'm quite interested in that, you know, more especially that I work with Indigenous people, because I think most of the time we are so much sidelined in terms of the training and civil society, like civil education, even about elections in rural areas. People tend not to follow much because we are not exposed to media. We don't know what is going on. And now we rely on this information like contact physical presentations and workshops so that people understand what elections are, what is expected of them, and what they can do to keep peace in their communities, and also use our traditional leaders to maintain such peace so that we do not experience violence and other things. So I mentioned traditional leaders because I know in many cases they are well respected by their people. And if also we can emphasize their neutrality when it comes to politics, so that every member in the community can be able to trust them. Lastly, I think I wanted to say that even when you train the observers, it would be best to cross-country them so that you don't have an observer observing in the area where is known. I'm looking at the risk and the security of those people. So it's best when people deal with someone who they are not used to. Well, obviously, if they are introduced, they will be introduced as observers. But if someone from Western Cape can be going to KZN and so on, so that you are exposed to a different setup of people and you don't really get too much into the local politics in the area. Thank you.
Yeah, I think we can take one more from the side and then just pause for answers.
Well, thank you. Again, thank you again for the brilliant presentation. I'll be quick. You mentioned 2 rallies. But again, my question emanates from the fact that I don't know how much intellectual capital within DoD, but I'm of a view that most of it is underutilized or are not probably sufficiently utilized. Either way you want to look at it. But I wanted to suggest that at least we substitute one of the rallies with a workshop where we analyze the prevailing electoral atmosphere at the time and maybe develop some kind of strategies and tactics to respond to that environment and what follows thereafter. That's what I wanted to suggest. Thank you.
Okay, so coming to the issue of political parties, the reason I think it's a useful idea to know where there are political parties based and where they are monitoring, and that there would be better transparency because each political party is there to observe the process. But there does need to be a distinction between political parties and civil society, because I think ultimately this is a civil society pronouncement on the integrity of the elections. And I think that there are many more people in the country who are not political party members, who are either in civil society or simply individuals who want to contribute to democracy. And this is about creating a platform for them. So if we go back to the 2021 Afrobarometer report, the institutions in our country that enjoy the least amount of legitimacy are political parties. The IEC enjoys the highest degree of, according to that report, the highest degree of legitimacy. So if we align ourselves with the results or the pronouncements of political parties, I think we need to be aware of the kind of perceptions there are around political distrust at the moment. That's not to say, I think the very act of monitoring is a political act, but it's a politically non-partisan act because we're not aligned to any political party. The issue of electoral reform, I agree fully on that it does need to be an assessment of what exists currently. It's the first time that our country will be running on this system where independent candidates are allowed at a national and provincial level. So the next period will have to accommodate for an evaluation of what has worked, what hasn't worked, both in terms of the numbers game that I think Auta, Michael Atkins and others are looking at, but also in terms of broader accountability and whether that does need to to in time inform our approach to constituencies, how they are drawn up, whether that splits communities or not, is all up, I think, for debate. And it's why this process where the ministerial panel is going to be important, that there needs to be submissions made to that panel that are very well informed. It can't be generalized submissions that are being made to that panel, because there's sufficient time between now and 2029 to ensure that that detailed research work is done. On the issue of non-acceptance of results. So, Sania, I think that there is no precedent for it here as yet. So it requires collective thinking. This campaign is meant to give us some sort of a foot to stand on, because in the absence of having actual field workers in voting stations who are actively observing the elections, we can't pronounce on anything. If we have one observer in one voting station, we can pronounce on that voting station, but we can't just have an up in the air opinion on it. I think that the IEC has done significant work in ensuring that there's transparency, accountability of their systems. In our previous engagement with the IEC, we were told how the numbers show up on screen the same time that the IEC receives elections numbers coming up on its screen at the headquarters. Media organizations in the country, members of the public, are seeing it in real time. And that's something that other countries don't necessarily have. It first goes via one point and then out to the public. So I think we should be appreciative of that. But at the same time, we need to look at international examples where a country where one would assume democratic processes are firmly intact, like the US, for example, and you have Trump supporters that are called out and then storm the Capitol, or Brazil, where you have Bolsonaro's supporters being called out to do the same thing. We need to anticipate that sort of thing. In our country, we've had the experience of the July 2021 insurrection, so we know how things can go wayward. But I'm not too sure if civil society is prepared to counter that on the streets. So if we have supporters coming out disputing election results that by all accounts, from the IEC account, from civil society monitoring, and from a majority of political parties are said to be free and fair, and you have a set of people coming out and causing disruption, can we get as many or more people out into the streets to say, we're not going to allow this sort of disruption in our country? And I think ultimately that's what it does boil down to. Whether we prepare to have the capacity for it, I think, is yet to be seen. On the issue of African indigenous leaders in rural communities, I think all of the points there are valid. It's exceptionally important that we engage with rural communities. One of the difficulties that we are looking at the moment is if there's an app, for example, would there be sufficient connectivity in rural areas? It does make it a bit difficult. The IEC has a monitoring booklet that allows information to be collated afterwards and sent through, which is one form of doing things. But if we want to see results coming in live, it does require some sort of technology, whether that's an app or whether that's like, star 100, was the elections free and fair, click 1 for yes kind of thing, in its very simplest form. So the technical people, I think, will look at those kinds of things. The issue of moving people who are monitoring interprovincially so that they have a different sense and they're completely neutral, perhaps, would be a bit difficult from a logistics and cost point of view for any organization. If an organization has the capacity to field someone flying to Cape Town and monitoring there, for example, that would be great. But I think the advantage of having someone within a local community is that in your area who are the local political players. Who are the councillors, who are people in the different branches, the elections observers that are there and whether they're politically aligned or not. So you are able to be an expert in your own community on the political dynamics that are there that someone from the outside would not necessarily take note of. And I think that's the advantage that we want to leverage off. And then on the issue of training, I think there are organizations doing existing work around democracy training and voter education. And if there's anyone interested, we can link you up with the organizations that are doing this work. There are others who have put out training manuals in this regard. the training that we're really looking at is on the issue of how to use the technical system that will inform this, number one, why this is important. So why is it necessary to go out and do observing for this election? And then in terms of, I think just the issue of the legitimacy of the elections and getting as many people out to vote, I think that's an important issue. And it's something that must be the responsibility of all organizations to advocate for people to go out and vote on the day itself. On the issue of rallies, I think we're looking at three rallies. So Western Cape, Gauteng, KZN as a base, because those are the three provinces of focus. However, there will be provincial workshops that take place in every province. So we're looking at 9 provincial reach out sessions, basically. So outreach sessions where we go into a particular province, ask organizations who are interested to come through to an initial workshop on the issue. And then secondly, I think pending funding from the DoD side, whether there's able to be a follow-up workshop in those communities or not. But at least from there, we think that the training online can continue in different areas. Just to state that what we are proposing here in terms of the finer details of it, like 9 provincial workshops, is really what the DoD is going to be doing. There are other organizations that are likely going to be doing their own workshops, their own outreach. And the ideal that we would like to see is that if we can have a cumulative sense of all of that, so that we're able to say in Limpopo province for the month of November, this is all that will be happening, come out and support the organizations. Or organizations then have the alternative to see what existing material there is and say, in our community, we want to have our own training. We can maybe facilitate someone who knows a bit about the material to come in and speak to people who are there, or organizations can simply self-learn through the process. I don't know if the IEC wants to come in perhaps on the specific questions that were posed to you on what happens if there's a dispute of the elections, and just on the issue of the ballot papers and whether it can be pre-published.
Indeed, the ballot paper question, we will have big posters with the ballot so that people are already familiar with party sequencing when they go inside the station.
Oh, disputes. Okay. I just want to say, first of all, I didn't get your name, sir. Yeah, it is that for the Electoral Commission, one of the things that is a big problem is when the contestants don't have representation inside the voting station 1, 2. Maybe they do, and they either fall asleep or they are standing outside when they shouldn't. They don't want to sign because they're not sure what that signing means, etc., etc. So for my eyesight, I think that is an angle that would help the process quite a lot. To have people that are party agents or contestant agents that are well trained, that are bold, that understand the law enough to intervene when there's still time to intervene. And then when it comes to the dispute mechanism, once again, to go to that point, when you raise an objection to the presiding officer, so you can raise an objection to that. If you're not satisfied with that, it then escalates through the system until it gets to the commission. If you're not happy with the decision of the commission, the decisions of the commission are reviewable in the electoral court. And by the way, approaching the electoral court doesn't cost money. It doesn't have to cost money, unless, of course, you go and hire the most expensive senior counsel that you can get. Then you attach to yourself a lot of money. But I think the point that I want to make is that until we confront the behavior of contestants, from who they field to how they behave. For example, we've had instances where political parties mobilize their followers to go and dig trenches in areas so that people can't reach the voting station. So if we don't grasp the beast at that level, then it escalates to everything else. Or people think the election is not going the right way, and they begin to attack the Electoral Commission's warehouses. They begin to attack the Electoral Commission's collation centers. That is a point of vulnerability. And that is the assistance that the Electoral Commission needs from a neutral source where we are not threatened in that fashion. And it is a real issue. And on the basis of experience that I've just had in a particular country, when a country criminalizes independent tabulation, in South Africa, exit polls are not allowed in law, but you can tabulate the results. You can literally go around and do everything that the deputy CEO has said and tabulate. And then you have a basis on which to say, but this is just far out from what it is that I've calculated. And we can begin to have a conversation. There are jurisdictions where that has been criminalized. You can't do it. And if you don't have that data, it becomes very difficult to have a decent, sane conversation about whether the results of that elections are credible or not credible. I think let me leave it there. But I think for me, my frustration from where I sit is that there's just not enough systems and processes that are there to tackle the political parties themselves. They can basically do anything. And so you put all kinds of effort on the voters, how they should behave, civil society, how they should behave, the Electoral Commission, which, by the way, we welcome as the Electoral Commission. But then the key player, who is the political party, and whatever formations they thought, they can basically do anything. They can run roughshod on everything. And there is no boundary, zero. Thank you.
Thanks for that. Let's go the side and then we'll come to the center.
Thank you. My name is Rashid Gata. I'm an independent concerned citizen. I've done some research and reading on the statistics, and I was quite surprised to see that in 1994, our first election, there was an 87% voter turnout when there was no voter education from the rent roll. There was about 19 to 21 million people that voted. In the last election, only 12 million out of 40 million voted. So reading some research, they're saying that instead of, people manually voter registering, it should become an automated registration process, which is a policy that should be adopted. I don't know if it's too late to do that. That's what I've been reading. And in terms of the younger unemployed people, only 35%, are coming to vote. Only 6 million out of the 9 million under 30 years old have registered to vote. So it's not that they don't know, it's just that they might not be interested. And then some countries like Australia, they're making it a criminal, to not vote is a crime. So they're dictating that if you don't vote, then it's a crime. So this forces people to vote. So maybe we should have a box in the ballot that says, if someone doesn't want to vote for a political party, then they should say like none of the above. But we should make it a crime not to vote, so then we can get a high participation. The last election, the ANC got 5 million or 5.5 million out of 12 million votes, which is only 13% of the 40 million eligible voters. Thanks.
Okay, thanks for that.
Thank you. My name is Pilile Mbata from an organization called Voting Rights Organization of South Africa. Thank you very much for that presentation. Mine is just a comment. There is a need for civil society organizations and IEC to join hands to improve the quality of election observation. You indicated in your presentation just now that after all is done during elections, there will be an audit, but the quality of audit can be questionable if the work of observers was just only on the election day. So we need to look at how we improve the quality in terms of the activities of especially the political parties that take place before the elections, pre-election campaigns and all that, because it may have an impact on the turnout of voters on the day. So if we can start looking at how we professionalize election observers in terms of capacity building. I know that there is some good work that IEC is doing at the moment, but that we need to strengthen that area so that the reports that we give at the end are quality reports that everybody will be comfortable with. Thank you.
Thanks, Pindile. Are there any questions in this row? So we can take them all together and then go to the online questions. No? So, Mr. Gata, I think just in terms of making not voting a crime, I don't think that would be constitutionally compliant, because the right of choice in a democracy is what's the basis of a democracy. And in some countries, perhaps that would be the case, but I don't think that would ever withstand constitutionality in the country. That being said, it does not mean that organizations, individuals should not persuade people to vote. And it does go to the point that I think others here have been raising about the actual legitimacy of political parties to govern when the minority is a real minority in the country actually votes them into power. It may be the majority vote that they can get, but it's the minority of the population itself. And I don't think that South Africa is unique in this position. So if you look at other democracies in the world, there are similar strains on the very idea of democracy and how it plays out. And how it can be advanced. I think there are new ideas, for example, citizens' assemblies in some countries that are beginning to be developed so that the quality of democracy is enhanced. I think for the purposes of this election, it would be the responsibility of civil society to try and increase voter registration details. The system is now online, but I don't think that there's an automated process, again, because you may choose not to be registered, for instance. I'm not too sure what would be the kind of legal ruling around that, but perhaps the IEC can come in on that question. And I think that there is a general sense that people who voted in 1994 are those that remain on the voters' roll. And as those people age, perhaps some pass on, the voters' roll decreases and you're not seeing a mass amount of younger people registering. But I also think it speaks to the disillusionment of young people in democracy, but perhaps how democracy is being implemented in this country. Over the last few years, the kind of issues from state capture, service delivery issues, unemployment affects young people directly. And that's perhaps manifested in the lack of willingness to participate in the democratic process. I think what the responsibility rests on civil society, but perhaps even political parties to re-engage young people in that process and show why democracy may start off with the vote, but is not limited to the vote. It's really the accountability mechanisms and active citizenry that needs to follow thereafter. I think, again, that speaks to the quality of political party candidates that was raised. I think that was the comment, am I right? Quality of election observers. Oh, quality of elections observers. Certainly, I think the IEC has been doing phenomenal training. At least the training that I attended in previous years has been quite, solid in terms of what you can do, what you can't do at the voting station. But I think that there is always room for improvement around that, because oftentimes you go into a voting station and you're not entirely sure of the process. But because we see this as something that kicks off with 2024, hopefully that capacity can be built towards 2026, even in terms of the quality of the observers themselves. Okay, maybe we can take the online questions and then come back to voter registration. Okay, as DOD, what actions do you intend to take before or after elections, if those mentioned in the Zondo Commission report are again deployed to either stand for national or provincial legislature? This goes to the issue of the candidate quality. So those who are on political party lists. There are organizations currently doing work in this regard. So if you look at Unite Behind, in the last month, has done a campaign in the Western Cape aimed at a particular member of parliament who has been deeply implicated in the Zondo Commission. And there's an active campaign to try and focus on that individual. In the absence of having the kind of, call it a blacklist or orange list because of the orange overalls campaign of implicated politicians, it limits our ability to effectively mobilize and put pressure on political parties. The Equal Education a few years ago had a very interesting campaign. There was a portfolio committee chair that had a criminal record and was put up to chair the portfolio committee on education. They mobilized civil society effectively so that that individual was then removed from that position. And it requires really the consistent effort, and the organizations that are involved in anti-corruption work, those focusing on the Zondo Commission, I think will be able to give a bit more feedback on the work that they're doing. I know that Open Secrets has pulled together some sort of a listing before. We'll be pulling together a set of tracking devices on the implementation of the Zondo Commission recommendations, and I think we can look to them for that. But this issue is really, for now, in terms of evaluating candidates and the criteria we put to it, but it's also post-election period and the accountability mechanisms that we do have and that we don't have, and the kind of public mobilization that needs to go towards this as well. Would a central command center be set up to coordinate the observer efforts? Who will run this? At the moment, Defend Our Democracy thinks that it would have some capacity to set up some semblance of a technical system and perhaps a nerve center where some of this information can be collated. But where there are other organizations also doing this work, like the SACC and OUTA as well, I think it's bringing together our cumulative efforts to see how best to then pronounce on the results. So we are looking at this, but to indicate that to have a fully operational command center, you need lots of funding. And civil society organizations generally are not in a position to set this up effectively. So I think where we would be able to do so. Our experience in the recent Zimbabwe elections that we were observing has proven that young Black observers in rural areas are used and exploited worst by European observers. Why should we believe that Black young people will not be used just to collect data because they reside in rural areas? I think our country context is perhaps slightly different from Zimbabwe. We must flag the attack that has been leveled on civil society organizations here, where there are all sorts of mistruths, misinformation being spread that civil society is funded by agents of the West and civil society. I think that there are checks and balances here for people to challenge civil society organizations via our democratic systems, whether they think civil society is being objective or not in their quest. I'd like perhaps people to advise if the Watful community that's here today, or if Defend Our Democracy, or if Active Citizens Movement, or traditional leaders who are here are being funded by European agents. And I think we need to call that out. Ultimately, young people in this country, irrespective of race, have agency. And we shouldn't take away from that. So if someone wants to register as an elections observer, they have the freedom to do that. If they feel that their voice is going to be exploited, they have the freedom to refrain from that and make public why they're refraining from that. So I don't think we must take away from that agency just because of some broad narrative. When will the 9 provincial workshops commence? We are looking at the period between October and November. Workshops will be done in all 9 provinces, but only Western Cape, KZN, and Gauteng province are targeted for the Observer campaign. Can you please clarify why only 3 provinces are targeted? Won't that limit the... So it will limit in some ways the conclusion of our report, but we are cognizant of our practical ability. So KZN, Western Cape, and Gauteng is where we think there's a broader base of civil society organizations where we can have 80 to 100% coverage in these voting stations in these 3 provinces. There may well be maybe 200 or 300 organizations in Limpopo or Northwest Free State that we may be able to reach out to, but we're not going to be able to, for this election, guarantee that we're going to have 80 to 100% election observer status there. Will it limit the conclusions? In some way, yes. We're able to pronounce on where we observe or where other civil society organizations observe. We may not be able to observe all 23,000 voting stations. Again, I'll stress that this is something that we are working towards for 2026, 2029. What about taking oath and code of conduct by IEC staff and political parties and their party agents to mitigate the risks as identified, including inside voting stations? I think that's an idea that can be put to the IEC to consider. Should the electoral code of conduct be reviewed and amended then in order to ensure that political parties don't have so much power, are not accountable to anyone but themselves? The fact that political parties have this country on a chokehold is not healthy for any democracy, and the IEC Parliament needs to stand up and start looking at applying more strict legal frameworks to govern political parties. I think that the IEC doesn't make law. Political parties themselves in Parliament are responsible for lawmaking in this country. Perhaps the opportunity is for organizations to draft policy, at least with whistleblowers, for example. We know that there's an active working group of civil society organizations drafting policy, making those propositions, and organizations perhaps post-2024 need to look at this avenue of work around policy making. There are various ways in which to put draft bills to Parliament, and perhaps that's where the opportunity rests. Beyond policy making, it is really active citizenry that influences the way political parties respond to this country. So we've seen with the treatment action campaign in the early years, the kind of archaic thinking that was coming from political circles on the issue of antiretrovirals in the country. Civil society, through the sheer might of its force on the ground, managed to shift that significantly. And I think that that's the kind of trend that we want to continue in the country, to try and shift things in the interest of the public. There are already problematic online campaigns linked to electioneering. Are there plans for online observer monitoring, and does the law sufficiently cover remedies for election misinformation? Online observer monitoring would be difficult. You do need someone physically in a voting station to monitor the elections as it takes place in that station. Where online monitoring could be effective is around the issue of misinformation. So if people are tweeting misinformation, I don't know what we call now posting, because it's X and not Twitter anymore, but if they're putting out posts that contain misinformation, it's where organizations like Media Monitoring Africa and others are able to flag it, call for it to be taken down. And similarly, it would require ordinary people themselves challenging misinformation online. And I think some of these social media sites are quite vibrant in that regard, where that discourse is there. I think that's it from my side. I'm going to take comments from the IEC. Finally, we are currently waiting for one more representative of the IEC to come in after this just to speak about the observer process. So I think let's take the comments and then we can go to the next segment.
Okay. Thank you very much. I don't know, as I was reflecting, I thought to myself, maybe we didn't answer in a pointed fashion what would happen if people decided that despite all the data that is in front of you, we are just not accepting the result. End of story. I think the posture of the Electoral Commission has always been grounded in law. And we always use the law. There's no other way of overturning an election unless you go through the law. I thought I should revisit that question because I felt like we had not addressed it pointedly. So I want to share with you an experience when long ago when I was very young, and I have not been young in a long time. I used to bother the Electoral Commission about introducing a space in the ballot box that said none of the above. And as election administrators, they gently taught me over many years that if you have most people, the job of the Electoral Commission is to give a result over and hand it over to either the Chief Justice or somebody to constitute a government. Now, if I have to go to a Chief Justice and give them a result that says none of the above, from where I sit as the Electoral Commission, it's not the most effective way of using the Electoral Commission, I think. So I think what it is that they're trying to get to, we have to do it in other ways, either legislatively or in other ways, because once it is in the law, we are duty bound to implement it. But I was once a proponent of the none of the above thing. I am no longer a believer in that option. I think it avoids a serious problem that we have, and it gives you a sense of relief that you've ticked none of the above. The fact of the matter is there's work that you didn't do that you can do. And there are other options that you should, I think, exercise that you are not exercising. And voting, whilst important, means absolutely, it means very little if you don't follow up and use the mechanisms that are available to hold people account. Just to cast your vote and then walk away and cross your fingers and hope that things are going to work just doesn't work. We know that it doesn't. Thank you.
Thanks so much for that input. I think to round off the session, just the next steps. From Defend Our Democracy side, we want to, in the next week or so, put out to organizations a memorandum, which will basically spell out a bit about this campaign, why this process is important. And we hope that through getting organizations to endorse this, we have a better sense of who are the organizations that are willing to be part of this, where do we need to expand our reach. We are looking at formally launching this campaign in October, setting up the technical processes, developing the toolkits that will go with it. And then I think there's just, before we conclude, there's a comment that has come through. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. Greetings, everyone. It's a follow-up question. So my name is Nongo Solo from Abacha Force of Change. So I completely understand your response when you say you no longer advocate for none of the above, because basically your task is to hand over to Chief Justice to establish governance, which completely makes sense. However, can you not consider that for a true reflection of what then the society feels like, it can still be treated as a sport, not counted as a voting majority? So for example, if majority says none of the above. Obviously, the Chief Justice cannot establish government, but can it not be considered as sort of like a spoiled voter, just for true reflection of where the society is, and also it gives a sense of what how much option people have.
The mic.
Thank you for that. Let me not speak on behalf of the other commissioners. Let me put it to them. But I have been a proponent of that, and I have come to realize the wisdom of not doing it. But I think my job is right now is to say, I hear you. Let me take it back, and you can hold me accountable by taking my card and say, Mamnams. So this is what you said. So what did the commission say? And I'll give you an answer. Okay.
Thanks for that. There are two quick questions that I'll deal with very quickly. Surely a more effective mechanism to replace voter registration is once someone gets an ID or is considered a citizen, to simply consider them a registrant. Again, maybe the IEC could give a bit more detail to that, but I think voter registration in some ways is also linked to areas, local government elections, for example, is based on your ward councillor. If you move from here to Cape Town, for instance, you need to ensure your registration details change. It's not just about your being an active citizen, and maybe there's some other legal answer for that. I think the IEC can answer that very quickly. It's counterintuitive to have a hard copy ballot where there are people who are there who are doing the counting, and there's room for a lot of error. Can't this be online, like banking systems, ATM networks, etc.? I think that the reason why countries opt for ballot papers is because it's physical. If there's a dispute about the election, those ballot papers are collected, stored somewhere for a particular period of time. You can go back and count ballot by ballot. Whereas online systems, given the way in which technology has evolved, the room for those systems being hacked, being tampered with, is always there. So for someone to see a physical ballot and have physical evidence of the number of votes per party, I think that's the reason why it has still remained the way that it is. And perhaps the other reason is that not all areas have access to electronic systems. We've seen recently with the post-bank saga in our country, how people have been unable to access the very basics, their pension at the end of the day, the grants at the end of the day. So if we can't run that system effectively, can we assure ourselves that we're able to run full elections on an electronic system? I don't think so as yet. I'm going to allow for one more comment from the IEC before calling up Mr. Mlungisi Kelembe from the IEC to give an overview of just the voter observing process. We are running out of time, so we're going to try and wrap up very soon. After that, we can try and take a few questions in relation to it.
Right. As we understand it, the constitutional scheme is that there is personal agency required from individuals. And to make it automatic, you're already removing the responsibility from an independent election management body. You're placing that responsibility to compile a voter's roll in the hands of an executive, a person who may be running for political office. So those are the things that you need to consider. But we think the scheme is sound. There must be personal agency because a person can opt out and not want to be a registered voter.
I think we dedicated on your laptop example.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mlungisi Kelembe. I'm the person who you will be dealing with as soon as you start the process of getting yourselves accredited as observers. Now, the election observation is a universal phenomenon. In South Africa, it started in 1999. And when we say started in 1999, most people would ask what happened in 1994. In 1994, we had election monitors. That election monitoring happens every time when there's a transition from an undemocratic era to a democratic era. The difference between the two is that monitors do almost everything that observers do, but in addition, they can interfere in the voting process in the voting process at the voting station, especially where voting staff or party agents flout some of the regulations with respect to the voting process. With election observation, observers go to the voting station, they observe everything that is happening, and they jot down everything that they think does not go according to what they have been told will be going on at the voting station. My presentation will be taking you, therefore, on the process of accreditation of observers, and also the code of conduct of observers and the powers and duties of observers. I try to put everything in as far as possible in a small presentation. So I hope at the end of the presentation, you will be able to ask me questions so that to bring out most of the issues that are missing on the presentation. With respect to the accreditation of observers, the accreditation is done in terms of Section 84 of the Electoral Act. And that act stipulates that any juristic person may apply to the commission in the prescribed manner, which I will describe later on, for accreditation as an observer. For consideration, an applicant must be competent and professional. I think we get this part in every aspect of elections. For instance, with the candidates, they have to meet a criteria which is very closely related to this one. Observers must be able to subscribe to the code of conduct governing observers. They must observe the elections impartially and independently of any registered party or candidate contesting that election, and that the accreditation is for one election only. Now, this is one aspect that normally confuses most of the organizations that have been accredited to observe elections. In between elections and during the election period, for which we have been accredited for, there are by-elections. The legal regime as it stands at the moment does not provide for the commission to accredit observers for by-elections. But because the commission has an open mind and the legislation does not really restrict that much in terms of observers, the commission has an option to approve those applications to observe by-elections. But you cannot use this certificate for these elections to observe a by-election. You have to get a special permission from the commission. That is, you have to apply for each and every by-election that you want to observe in the country. This one is mainly for the main election, which is the national and provincial elections for 2024. You will also have to apply again to observe the the local government elections when they take place in 2026. Now, the most important part, what are the powers and duties of observers? Observers must observe the proceedings at a voting station, including the conduct of staff at the voting station, compliance to determined voting hours, the performance of initial procedures, the voting procedures at the voting station, assistance to certain voters like those voters living with disabilities, the issuing of ballot papers, just to make sure that no voter is issued with more than one ballot paper at a time, objections concerning the voting, sealing of ballot papers, the movement of and voting in the mobile voting stations, the counting of votes and determination of provisional results, objections concerning the sorting of ballot papers, objections concerning the counting of results and determination of provisional results, the verification processes and objections thereto. Most of these areas, these objections that have been referred to above happen right there at the voting station. But before I leave this area, probably you're asking yourself in your mind, what is the conduct of staff at the voting station? How are you supposed to know that? How are you supposed to know the voting hours? How are you supposed to know the voting process, et cetera, et cetera? So what happens is that the commission puts aside days, numerous days. They put aside numerous days between the days when we have been accredited and election day to brief, or let's say to train observers. So you will be trained on the voting process at the voting station. You will be trained on how the voting staff is our colleagues who do the actual work at the voting station should perform or should conduct themselves, how the political parties and party agents should conduct themselves, who should be at the voting station on voting day, and most importantly, one of the most controversial issues that normally comes up during the election is the assistance of voters at the voting station. So those are the issues that we'll update you on once your processes of accreditation have been completed. We have, in our planning, we have put aside a couple of days where we will be doing this. Now, in as far as this process is concerned, we don't have an end date. There are two, or let me say three special kinds of observers. There's domestic observers like yourselves. We've got international observers. We've got diplomats. We've got representatives of governments who would come and as invited by the South African government to observe the elections. So we make sure that we give everybody an opportunity to be trained on the electoral system in South Africa and on the voting process. So basically, we do this until the eve of the elections. More especially for international observers, because most of them, especially those who are not well resourced, would come on the eve of an election and they would require the same treatment that was given all the other observers. So now that we have been accredited, you have to comply with a code of conduct of observers. I'll go through this one very quickly. Every accredited observer and person appointed by that observer must observe the election impartially and independently of any registered party or candidate contesting the election, remain non-partisan and neutral, be competent and professional, provide the commission with a report of their observations, which will include The degree of impartiality shown by the commission, the degree of freedom of political parties to organize, move, assemble, and express their views publicly, the opportunity for political parties to have their rights to observe all aspects of the electoral process, the fairness of access for political parties to national media and other resources of state, the proper conduct of polling and counting of votes, and any other issue that concerns the essential freedom and fairness of an election. They must also comply with all instructions given and every obligation imposed by the commission, any electoral officer, any employee or officer of the commission, or a member of the security services acting on the instructions of the commission. They must avoid doing anything that would indicate or be seen as indicating partisanship, act in strictly neutral and unbiased manner, disclose to the commission any relationship that could lead to conflict of interest regarding the performance of their duties as observers or with the process of observation or assessment, not accept any gifts or favor from a political party, not participate in any function or activity that could lead to perception of sympathy for a particular candidate or political party, not express a view or opinion on any matter which can affect the elections, not influence or attempt to influence the choice of a voter, not wear or carry or display any registered party symbols or colors. Not complying with any of these would lead to the revocation of accreditation. Now, one of the questions that I would be asked is, when does the observation start? Does it start and end on election day, or does it start long before election day? On our side as the IEC, we have opened the process of accreditation already. We've got an online application system, which is currently running, and we will open it until the eve of the elections. But if you apply, you must please only apply once, don't apply every day until the eve of the elections. So what it means is that as soon as you have been accredited as a voter, as an observer, you can go and observe the registration at the voting station. Our first registration weekend is on the 18th and 19th of November. If you have been accredited before that time, you can go and observe that process. Secondly, once the political parties start running their campaigns, you can, wearing your observer bib so that we don't, so that you are not confused as a political party member. You can go and observe that rally. The purpose of observing that rally is to make sure that you understand the environment, the political environment shortly before the elections. It will help you when you write your report. You will be able to judge if a particular rally by a political party was inflammatory in nature, and whether that party in actual fact had enough support as it claims to have. You know, all those things that will help for you to determine whether the elections were free or fair. So you should be able to study the political environment and to make sure that no political party is interfered with in its campaigns and in its rallies. So your period of observation starts immediately when you are accredited, and it ends after the results have been released. The accreditation process. The process is quite simple. We issue adverts inviting applicants in all weekend newspapers and national and provincial newspapers. We have not issued the invitations as yet. We will do that closer to the registration weekend. The reason why we haven't done that is that we have discovered that in the past, when we issue those invites very early in the process, we don't get the results that we expect for the money that we spend on the newspapers. So that's why only for now, we have put the advert on the website, and also we have put the application form on our website. An online application form has been developed for this purpose, as I've earlier said. All applicants are notified of the status of their application accordingly. Immediately once the application has been approved, they are notified. All applicants are entered in a database and shared with political parties to confirm objectivity. We have had in the past applicants who were members of political parties. And we also have had in the past applicants who did not qualify as observers by virtue of their other professions. Especially for our international media, when they fear that they might not be accredited in South Africa as the media representatives, they apply as observers, and we normally catch them somehow there and refer them to the relevant authorities. With political parties, we give them all the list of accredited observers, and they go through them. In the past, they have identified one or two applicants who they said, no, we know these people, they are associated with a particular political party. In that instance, we withdrew the application or their accreditation. All applications for accreditation are considered by the Commission, and application forms and instructions are available on our website. A successful applicant is issued with a certificate confirming the accreditation, an identification card with full names of each observer, so that they can be able to access the voting station. You won't be allowed to access a voting station without this card. You must also wear an identification apparel, which you can wear on voting day or any other day where there's an election activity taking place. Now, our legislation as it stands at the moment only covers observation in as far as elections is concerned, but the Commission has extended that to include registration, rallies, and election day, and beyond. So basically, you have all that. The reason for that there is multifold. Firstly, international organizations usually send long-term observers. There's what is called long-term observers. Those observers arrive in the country like 2 or 3 months before the election. So we have to accredit them so that they can attend all the things that are happening with respect to elections. And they are short-term observers. Those are the observers that will come in the country a week before the elections. Fortunately, you don't have to have long-term observers because you're already in the country. That concludes my presentation. Thank you very much. Yeah. Okay. Maybe she missed it. Oh, Mr. Shiburu was saying to me that I need to emphasize one thing, that when we say that an applicant is a juristic person is a kind of an organization, an institution, or somebody in law that can be sued. So we don't accredit individuals. So if you feel like you want to be an observer, look around for an organization that is already accredited as an observer and join that organization. Like, for instance, Defend Our Democracy. You can't come to the IEC as an individual with your CV and say, hey, here I am. I would like to be accredited as an observer. So let me just emphasize that part. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Mr. Keleme. I'm going to ask that you stay here in case there's any questions. And thank you so much for the clarity on the juristic person. I think that really speaks to the strategy that civil society organizations need to be employing in terms of maximizing observers. So thank you so much for that. Are there any questions based on this presentation? Okay, there's one hand there. Anything online? Okay, so 2. Zinzi, anything that has come through online? Okay. Mr. Keleme, I'm going to ask that you come back just to take the 2 questions in the audience, and then we can look at what has come through online.
Okay, thank you so much once more. So the first question is, to what extent or what's the limitation in terms of jurisdiction for observers? Because yes, we observe at voting stations, but are they allowed to observe at NEF Center? Are they allowed to get in there and sit with the people who are actually collecting data of what's happening at the voting station? That's the first one. The second one, do you actually inform your staff about the observers? Because the experience we had as Abacha Force of Change from the previous election was that the staff was not informed about observers, and you get there and they begin to ask you who you are and they want to make verifications. So how far do you actually train them about observers? And the last one, you spoke about the representation of government, that we even allow representatives of government to be observers. So what kind of government representatives are those? Because you will find that municipal managers actually come to the voting stations. Yes, they are government representatives, but yet you remember that municipal managers are actually political appointments, which is a breach of conduct because they engage very deeply with presiding officers. Thank you.
Can I answer those ones before? Yeah, let me start with the last one. When I spoke to government, I was referring to foreign governments, not various government officials within the country, but those that are invited by the South African government from other jurisdictions. Secondly, sorry, what was the second question? Oh, okay. Sure. Yes, observers are allowed in our results operation centers. We have 10. There's one at national level and one in each provincial capital. But there's also a but. You have to be accredited, and there's limitation because the space that we get is not practical to in such a way that it can accommodate everybody at the same time. Now, in terms of our staff are supposed to allow you in if you've got your tag that identifies you as an observer. Secondly, the staff at the voting station also have to take into consideration certain practicalities. Sorry. If the voting station has got more than enough people, they will limit the number of people to access the voting station and prioritize the voter. So it's going to be a challenge now with these elections where we have political parties and independent candidates, because each political party will expect to have a representative in a voting station, and an independent candidate will expect to have a representative at the voting station, and also observers will expect to have a representation at the voting station. So the person who manages the voting station will determine who he or she or how many people they can allow at a time at the voting station, so as not to disrupt the voting process. So basically, to answer your question, yes, our staff have been informed about observers, but there are limitations depending on how busy the voting station is at a particular point in time.
Okay, thank you. I just want to check on the matter of assistance at the polling station for those who require assistance. I know that many of them would bring a confidant to assist, but in some instances, you will find that the presiding officer and another official are then assisting, but then it becomes too crowded because it's a presiding officer sometimes and 3 other officials that come to the box, to the area there to assist. Then it affects the privacy of that individual. So I think at the level of training, there should be some caution to the staff because they overdo it sometimes. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I am Precious. I'm a data scientist from the Third Republic. With regards to foreign governments being accredited, what are their limitations and what's their verification process? Because I don't think it would be wise to have government officials that have been accused of international crimes as observers, or government officials that have been attached to our corruption issues, for instance, or countries thereof. So what are their limitations as with their accreditations, and what is their verification process in this regard?
Can I just add my question, Paul Graham? It's just a logistical question. I know many domestic observer groups are often recruiting their individual observers quite late. So how late can they go and you can still get them individually accredited? And how late can they go and you can still get them individually trained?
Okay. Oh, sorry. Yes. I'll start with the last one that I remember. I recall very well. It's a very difficult question to answer. The Commission has no intention of excluding anyone in exercising the duty of election observation. As I said, we would hold the very last training event before special votes start, which is like 3 or 4 days before the election day. You must remember, before the election day, there's 2 special vote days. So we would hold the last training event a day or 2 before the special votes begin. I hope I've answered your question. We manufacture those, like, in actual fact, we've got a very great system which takes the responsibility of producing those tags away from us. After you have been accredited, your accreditation letter comes with your tag. You print it, you put it in your sleeve, you get yourself a lanyard and you put it around your neck, together with your letter of accreditation. Coming to the issue of foreign governments, the foreign governments are invited by the government of the Republic of South Africa, not by us. So it's for the government of South Africa to determine who their friends are. So unfortunately, it kind of falls outside our jurisdiction, the determination or the investigation of whether they have committed crime, they have done other things like abuse of human rights and all that stuff. Yeah. In terms of assistance to voters, I'll leave that question to Mr. Shiburi to assist with.
Essence, the point on the training of staff is well taken. We'll reinforce that in our training. Assistance to voters, similarly. On our part, we are trying as much as possible to safeguard the rights of people to vote without disclosing their choice and to vote independently. For people who are visually impaired, we have a universal ballot template. It's just a tactile board where you slide the ballot box, the ballot paper inside that sleeve. And if you are braille literate, all that you need is for people to tell you the numbering of the parties, the sequence of the parties and their numbers. And if you are braille literate, you will be able to vote without disclosing your choice to anyone. It also helps some of us who can't function in the morning because we shake before we get something to drink. So my scribbling will be contained in that box, in that single box. It won't go outside and render my my ballot spoiled. But the points on the training of our staff to create awareness on how we assist people are well taken. We will consider those. And there's also a difficulty because the law makes provision for different things in local government and in national election of the type of assistance that you could provide. For some voters, the law allows them to be assisted by a person who they came with. But in other instances, it makes it clear that the presiding officer in the presence of party agents. So we'll train better on that one so that it doesn't have to be every agent at the station. Agents can take turns in rotating to observe. It doesn't have to be all 20 of them observing a single voter making it. The people allowed at voting stations, we're dealing with that one now because in the past, the commission has been generous and allowed all sorts of people into voting station. It has come back to bite us because everyone thinks they are important. A person goes to a voting station, they claim they say they're a municipal manager and they want them to be accorded VIP status. So we're going back to what the law provides. People recognize at the voting station, our electoral staff, party agents, accredited observers, and officers of the electoral official commission, and no one else, no MEC, no mayor, those type of things. Yeah.
In this row, is there anyone here? No? Oh, what are you going?
I think there's something that you mentioned about observations at rallies. So I'm just trying to think ahead, and maybe you can take me into your confidence. What is the intention of this portion of the Act? Is it possible that, for instance, because I think let me just be honest, we are in a period where desperation is on steroids, especially going to 2024. Can a political party be disqualified for making inflammatory statements at rallies? Not only that, for also illegal action that they might actually do in desperation of votes. And therefore, at what intervals will the observers make these reports that could even lead to such disqualifications if we're to be serious about what we're doing?
There are lots of things that happen at rallies. I want to mention a special case in KZN, where certain areas are highly contested between the ANC and the IFP. You find out that one of the parties will block the other from accessing the venue for the rally, even if the venue had been booked in advance. So those are the issues that observers must go and look at when at the rallies. And also, even if they are allowed in, certain political parties might come and disrupt. There are certain political parties or leaders of political parties who might use inflammatory language. Now, one thing maybe Mr. Shupuri mentioned was that closer to an election, political parties sign a code of conduct for an election. Once political parties sign that code of conduct, they have to adhere to it. Correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Shupuri, the use of inflammatory language is one of the things that are prohibited in that code of conduct. I've not looked at the latest version. So those are the things that observers must look at when they attend those rallies.
Yeah, any more questions before we get the online questions? Well, great. Monday, if I could get the mic just to go through the questions that come through online.
Thank you. So who monitors organizations that have been deployed as observers? Does the IEC monitor the organizations? This link to this, what is the remuneration or amenities for observers? Because the reality on the ground is that come counting time, observers are tired, hungry, have security concerns getting home because counting runs till late into the night. I think that the first part of it, the IEC can take. The second part, the organizations who field observers generally bear the responsibility of ensuring that their specific observers are home safely. Usually it's staff members of civil society organizations, but perhaps the IEC can add to that. The second one is a comment just to say that since 2014, this person has been accredited. They've had no difficulty accessing result centers, regional observation centers. I think that's ROCs. And they found the IEC officials and staff helpful, even when SEPs and security officials have been a bit more difficult. And then the last question is, DOD, you have not answered me on the interdict before or after by informing the party and the person. I'm not too sure I understand that clearly, so maybe the person who posed the question can just be a bit more detailed. And then the IEC, why is your list of managers not made public? Are you trying to be politically correct? And then again to the IEC, does your staff take an oath and know if it is a crime? I suppose that's in relation to whatever may play out. I'm not too sure what is the exact crime. And then lastly, can I wear a party T-shirt when coming to vote? And I'm assuming that's as an individual, not as an observer.
Okay. Let me start with the first one, which I think is talking about the deployment of observers. The IEC does not deploy observers. Observers can go anywhere in the country where they want to go to. We don't want to be seen to be limiting them to areas which we think are good, so that they can avoid areas which are not performing very well. So there's no limit on the deployment of observers. In actual fact, they deploy themselves. We have nothing to do with the areas where they go to. All that we can do is to advise them on the areas that are hotspots and the areas maybe that they might need to pay particular attention to. The second question on the remuneration, something that I forgot to mention, is that upon accreditation, and that is why we encourage organizations to apply as early as possible. Organizations that need resources, because IEC cannot be, most people are afraid to bite the hand that fits them. So if we feed your hand as an observer, you'll be scared of biting that hand. So we don't offer any form of remuneration or support to observers. We only support them in as far as training is concerned. If the training is going to be held in Cape Town, we'll get you to Cape Town, we'll book your hotel accommodation, we'll give you food, we'll give you the material. Other than that, nothing else is going to happen. So we encourage observers, those that are struggling with the resources, to come to us so that we can give them letters of support that will help them when they fundraise for their activities. We can also help them with organizations that could fund them in case they don't know where to go to. I think the other questions are for Mr. Shuburi. Yes.
Thank you.
List of the three key people at voting station: the presiding officer, deputy presiding officer, and voters roll officer are made available to contestants. They are well known. Staff at the voting station subscribe to a code of conduct that is issued by the commission. A voter can wear whatever they want to a voting station, except that within the boundaries of a voting station, the only political activity they can engage in is to make the mark and leave the voting station.
So there's one more question, which is again related to the results center. I think the person just wants clarity. Do they need to get separate accreditation for access to the results center? What is the process that follows for allowing organizations to enter there?
The results center becomes a key, what do you call it? A key security point or something like that. A national key point, yes. Yes. So as soon as we have set with the security apparatuses of the country, we will let organizations know how to access the results center. The process is not the same, it differs for each election.
But we can make APIs available so that even when they're not started, you can have access
Yeah, I think thanks for that point of clarity. The last is just a question around are political parties and election staff trained in relation to the observers? And I think that the response has been given that that will be a point that the IEC takes into consideration to emphasize. I'm going to take one more question before we round up, and we can then begin concluding, and Cynthia will come into the conclusion. So let's get one more comment and then we can close off.
Thank you again for the brilliant presentation. My name is Kenny Mogota. Skill set. You know, what sort of key skill sets do you guys look for, and what do you provide in terms of, you know, your training that you're talking about? I have a basic experience in terms of so-called, or what we call observation. I did some peacekeeping training some donkey years ago. So I qualified at what you call election observer, but this is under, you know, more on a broader UN level, so to speak. And that's quite a long time ago, but I just want to know now if there are new developments in that regard. Thank you.
Okay. The training of observers is basic. Basic in the sense that you are trained on what will be happening at the voting station, and also the legal framework that supports the voting process on election day. So that is what you are trained on. There's no other form of capacity development that is given, because the training is meant just for elections. I would say that is up to the organizations that recruit the individuals to make sure that they recruit individuals who are capable of thinking outside the box, and also of linking the information that they got during the briefing to what is happening out there. That is all that we do. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mr. Kalembe. I think we can give Mr. Kalembe a round of applause. I think it's safe to say that the IEC will open up its training processes, that information will be communicated to civil society organizations. There's still a bit of time for that work to get underway. And if there are any questions that come through, please do forward it to the Defend Our Democracy email. We'll send it through to the IEC if you have any questions that aren't perhaps answered here today. I'm going to call up Cynthia Stimple, who is a National Committee member of Defend Our Democracy. While Cynthia is coming through, I think just to say thank you so much to the Defend Our Democracy staff who pulled this off. So that Zinzi is sitting there, Monli and Chedza, who is working for Defend Our Democracy as well. Thank you so much. Thank you to Gibbs for the venue. They've always been very open to organizations hosting events here. Ahmed, who is here with his staff to help with the sound, thank you so much. The IEC, a big thank you for accommodating us, for meeting with us and being so transparent in terms of the way you've answered questions. And I think giving organizations a sense of surety about the processes that are underway for 2024. Lastly, I think that Thank you to the organizations and individuals, those online, those here today. We really appreciate your presence, and we're going to keep in touch with you about the next steps for this campaign. And we hope that you will join us. I think there's a general sense of despondency in the country, and we think that this sort of initiative will be able to lift people out of that sense of hopelessness that prevails. So Cynthia, over to you. And then once Cynthia concludes, we can head out for lunch. Thank you. Good day, everyone. Welcome to the IEC Deputy CEO, Mr. Shabure, Dr. Masuto, the CEO DOD, Sakura Vadi, and the Head of Commission, Mr. Kalimba. Thank you to everyone present here. In my observation, I counted that there's probably more than 50% of young people here in this room. So for me, that is very good. And welcome to the listeners, the attendees online, all protocol observed. I'd like to start with a quote. Organizing free and fair elections is more important than the result itself. This quote comes from Fatos Nano, a civil rights activist. I would like to go through just brief key points that were discussed here today. And then in conclusion, I'll just give a focus on where we are in our country with our own vote. So thank you all for your presentations. They were excellent and very detailed. And it allowed for the robust discussions we had in this room today, both the physical audience as well as the online audience. Key points that stood out for me today was the statement coming about the last line of defense that we have when we vote on how we'd like our society to be shaped. The other key point was that it's the people's own electoral commission, and therefore we are paying the IEC their salaries, and therefore we need to feel free to approach them for any questions, for any interrogation. And I think that needs to come out because people are not aware of this. The other point is that we know the term is 5 years, and so we need to ensure that we, within that 5 years, the 22nd of May, that we do get all our ducks in a row so that we're ready for this election. We know that the Electoral Amendment Act has already been informed as a part of the Constitution, and at the moment we also know that it's being challenged. For us as citizens of South Africa, we need to start reading up, make ourselves more informed. The presentation on critical path for readiness from the IEC, I think is really important that they're already showing us that they're working towards us being ready for the elections. They listed a few key points, and I'm sure we're going to make that public via the Defend Our Democracy. The fact that there will be an online and offline mode for people to vote and have the data is really important. Key areas that stood out was the design elements for the voting, and then the vote count accuracy and how they were going to do it. Key statistics was the voters' roll, that 55% were women and only 45% male. I think that's a very important statistic for us to note as citizens, and also for the female gender of our society. If I recall 1956, with the Women's March, 9th of August, it was the Women's March that determined that the pass be removed for
everyone to move from one section of the country to the other. The other area was the age anomaly of how voting has deteriorated. That from 1994, the voting list that we had versus recently that we're finding that the younger people are no longer voting. So that is a challenge for us. And we need to see how we improve our education around this. On the area of the Defend Our Democracy, we've put through what they foresaw in improving our electoral process is ensuring that we have the integrity and success of this, that the party funding is transparent, that the populist policies about parties are reviewed and people understand and read it and can interrogate it, that we manage the misinformation, and that we do understand each manifesto of the candidates, that we do ensure in our own vote as citizens that they are ethical and have moral standing, that we're not easily fazed by what we are told and accept it and not challenge it. And through the voter registration, that this is of good integrity and that we do have electoral observing. So it's and this led directly into Mr. Klembe's presentation, where he stated that there will be the detailed framework around the process and the training around the observers. So I think that is very important, and we need to encourage as many people to volunteer to become observers to ensure that we do have free and fair elections. And therefore, in conclusion, I'd like to state that I have hope. I have hope for our country, and I have hope for our people. We all hear that voting is important, but it can be easily done to feed discouraged and forget the true significance of our own participation in these elections. Voting is essential because it pushes a country's democracy to function in a fair and equal way. The whole point of democracy is to ensure that everyone has the chance to elect a candidate and vote for policies and that represent and benefit all communities. And therefore, I would like to leave a message also to our young adults that do not cop out from voting. That's the easy way out. You're young people, you have all the energy that we don't have any longer. Do your research, question and interrogate. Use your right to vote through being informed, through being able to debate, being able to reason, be able to question. Do not accept anything at face value. Have your data and your knowledge at hand. It's on your fingertips. Everything is here. You need go no further. So there's no excuse not to vote. We can all be disillusioned and we can all be upset, but the only way to make a change is to take action. And therefore, we need to ensure that we vote. I would like to leave you with two quotes, one from Dr. Martin Luther King. He said, "Our lives begin and end the day we become silent about the things that matter." And then from John Lewis, "The vote is precious. It is the most powerful non-violent tool." Notice, most powerful non-violent tool we have in a democratic society, and we must use it. John Lewis was also a civil rights activist. So in conclusion, I'd like to say thank you for all coming here today and taking the time and do exercise your vote, your right to vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Cynthia. Thanks to the volunteers, Auntie Kudi, for helping us with the registration. If you haven't filled in the registration form, please do it to Kudi, who will take down your details. And once again, thank you to everyone. We have some light bites, finger bites outside. Please do join us. Thank you.